The bustle of the airport contrasted cruelly with the silence that Clara Santos felt inside herself. Her fingers, accustomed to gliding with precision over the piano keys, now trembled uncontrollably as she held the phone against her ear. In front of her, through the immense window, she could see how her flight, her opportunity, her future, was rising toward a sky that was beginning to be tinged with orange. "Please, answer," she whispered as tears began to blur her vision. But the phone only returned the waiting tone. Her sister Helena, always her unconditional support, didn't respond when she needed her most. Clara lowered her gaze to her now useless ticket. The Vienna International Piano Competition, the opportunity she had worked for during the past 3 years, was vanishing with each meter the plane gained in height. At 45, it would probably be her last chance to relaunch the career she had sacrificed for her family. Sometimes we build cages with the best intentions, and we call these cages responsibility, she thought as she put away her phone. It was a phrase that her mother, also a pianist, used to repeat in her moments of doubt. Now she understood its depth, as never before. She let herself fall into one of the seats in the waiting room, trying to control the sobs that threatened to escape from her throat. Her meticulous planning, her eternal punctuality, everything had failed at the most crucial moment. A simple error in her reservation information, and now she was stranded with just enough money for a taxi back home, not for another ticket. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of self-pity. When she opened them, she found herself meeting the gaze of a man who was observing her from a few meters away, tall in his early 50s with an impeccable suit that revealed his position. What caught her attention wasn't his evident wealth, but the intensity of his gaze. The man approached with determined steps and stopped in front of her. His eyes, a deep green, seemed to study her with a mixture of curiosity and recognition that completely disconcerted her. "Excuse the intrusion," he said, with a voice that sounded strangely familiar. "But I can't help noticing that you are in distress." Clara straightened up, quickly wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. Pride, her faithful companion for decades, returned to her as a protective shield. "I'm fine, thank you," she responded with a coldness that contradicted the trembling in her voice. The man smiled, a smile that didn't seem mocking, but genuinely understanding. Then, with a fluid gesture, he extracted a ticket from his jacket and extended it toward her. "Sometimes destiny has other plans," he said. "Perhaps your journey should begin in a different way." Clara looked at the ticket with distrust. It was first class, for a private flight that would leave in an hour. "I cannot accept this from a stranger," she said, although her heart beat rapidly at the possibility of not losing everything. "My name is João Monteiro," he responded, extending his hand. "And I believe destiny has decided that we are no longer strangers." The words hung suspended between them like a promise, or perhaps like a warning. What Clara could not imagine while looking at that ticket was that this encounter would mark the beginning of the 6 months that would change the course of her life forever. Clara's apartment in São Paulo had always been a reflection of her personality, orderly, functional, and with a grand piano as the center of gravity. The walls, decorated with black and white photographs of her past performances, were silent witnesses to a career that had briefly flourished in her youth, before family responsibilities had dragged her away from international stages. That morning, like every morning for the past 15 years, Clara had risen at exactly 5:30. Her fingers had gone through the usual scales for the first hour, followed by 2 hours of practice with the Chopin pieces she would interpret in Vienna. Her precise movements, measured to the millimeter, reflected her life philosophy. Perfection was the only acceptable standard. "Clara, have you seen my blue shirt?" Her sister Helena's voice had interrupted her concentration. Clara had stopped her interpretation in the middle of a particularly delicate passage, breathing deeply to control her irritation. "It's where it always is, Helena." Second drawer left side. Helena, 7 years younger, and as chaotic as Clara was methodical, had appeared at the door of the studio with an apologetic smile. At 38, she still depended on her older sister for the most basic matters of daily life, especially since her divorce had left her emotionally devastated. "I don't know what I would do without you, Clara," she had said, approaching to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Are you nervous about the trip?" Clara had restarted the musical passage, her fingers sliding with mathematical precision over the keys. Preparation eliminates nervousness, she had responded, a phrase that her first piano teacher constantly repeated. What Clara hadn't told Helena was that this competition represented much more than a simple competition. It was her last chance to recover the career she had abandoned when her parents fell ill, and she had assumed the responsibility of caring for them and raising her younger sister. 15 years later, with her parents already deceased and Helena supposedly independent, Clara felt it was now or never. The taxi driver had arrived late, 10 minutes, just barely, but enough to alter her meticulous schedule. Clara had never missed a flight, had never been late for an important commitment. Her life was orchestrated with the same precision with which she interpreted Bach. "We can arrive on time if you take the expressway," she had insisted, constantly looking at her watch. "With the traffic at this hour, ma'am, it's impossible," the taxi driver had responded. And now, sitting in that airport with her future disintegrating before her eyes, Clara wondered if her entire life of perfection and control had been an illusion. "May I offer you a coffee while we wait for our flight?" João Montero's voice returned her to the present. Clara studied the man before her. There was something in his face, in the way he looked at her, that seemed vaguely familiar. "Do we know each other?" she asked cautiously. João smiled, an enigmatic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That depends on how you define know, Ms. Santos," he replied. "But yes, our paths have crossed before, although you probably don't remember." Clara frowned. Her memory was excellent, especially for faces. If she had previously met a man like João Montero, she was certain she would remember. "Are you a musician?" she ventured, thinking that perhaps she had seen him at some concert or festival. "No," he replied with a small laugh, "although music has been important in my life, especially yours." Before Clara could process that strange declaration, a voice on the loudspeakers announced that the private flight was ready for boarding. João offered her his arm with an old-fashioned gesture that, surprisingly, didn't seem out of place. "Shall we?" he asked with a confidence that suggested he already knew the answer. Clara hesitated. All her life she had been cautious, predictable, methodical. Accepting the offer of a stranger went against all her principles. But the thought of returning home defeated, of explaining to Helena that she had failed, of giving up her last opportunity. "Does this flight go to Vienna?" she asked, clinging to her last thread of rationality. João's smile widened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Not exactly," he replied, "but I promise our destination will be much more interesting." Contrary to all her better judgment, Clara took the arm he offered. In doing so, she felt as if she were abandoning not just the airport, but the entire life she had built up to that moment. The private jet was a world apart. Clara had never experienced such luxury: soft leather seats, crystal glasses, a small library in a corner, and even a digital piano discreetly located at the back of the cabin. "Do you like flying, Ms. Santos?" asked João, while a flight attendant served them champagne in elegant glasses. "Clara, please," she corrected, feeling strangely formal with the title Ms. "And no, not particularly. I prefer having my feet on the ground." "A revealing answer," he commented with that enigmatic smile that was beginning to intrigue her. For someone whose talent elevated her so high from such a young age, Clara looked at him with renewed interest. The references to her musical career were too specific to be casual. "How do you know so much about me?" she asked directly. João twirled the glass between his fingers, watching how the bubbles ascended in spirals. He seemed to carefully consider his response. "Do you remember the Villa Lobos Conservatory in Rio de Janeiro?" he asked finally. "About 30 years ago, approximately." Clara frowned. Her first job as a teacher had been at that small conservatory. She was only 20, freshly graduated, and full of dreams. "Of course," she replied cautiously. "I taught there for a summer before my first European tour." "I was 12 years old," João continued, his gaze now fixed on a distant point, as if he were contemplating a landscape of the past. "I was a terrible student. My parents insisted that I learn piano, but I lacked talent and, what's worse, interest." A blurry memory began to form in Clara's mind, a thin boy with eyes too serious for his age, sitting uncomfortably before a piano. "João Montero," she murmured, the name acquiring a new meaning. "The mayor's son." He nodded, an expression of satisfaction illuminating his face. "I'm glad you remember me," he said. "Although it wouldn't have been surprising if you had forgotten me. I was one among many students and not particularly memorable for my musical ability." Clara remembered him now, a withdrawn child, clearly uncomfortable in group lessons. She had assigned him to private lessons after noticing his intense stage fright. "You were terrified of playing in front of others," she said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "But in private, when you thought no one was listening, you played with feeling." Joaum's expression softened, a momentary vulnerability appearing behind his facade of a powerful man. "You were the only one who noticed," he said quietly. "The only one who didn't see me as a lost cause." The plane experienced slight turbulence, but Clara barely noticed, absorbed in the memories that were now flowing freely. "I taught you to play Clair de Lune," she recalled with a smile. "I told you that technique didn't matter if you could capture the emotion. And you told me that music wasn't about perfection, but about communicating what words cannot express," added Joaum. "A lesson I've applied in areas far beyond music." Clara observed the man before her, trying to reconcile the image of the shy boy with this self-assured businessman. What had happened in the 30 intervening years? "What happened afterward?" she asked. "After that summer, I never returned to Rio." Joaum's expression hardened subtly. "Life took its course," he responded with deliberate vagueness. "My parents divorced. My mother and I moved to São Paulo. The piano was forgotten for a time." Clara felt there was much more to this story, layers that Joaum wasn't revealing. "And now you appear at the exact moment I miss my flight to the most important competition of my career," she observed. "An extraordinary coincidence." Joaum looked at her directly, all pretense of casualness abandoned. "There are no coincidences, Clara," he said seriously. "Only opportunities disguised as bad luck. I've been following your career for years. I saw your name on the list of participants for the Vienna competition and decided it was time to repay a favor that I never could thank you for." "What favor?" she asked, feeling a mixture of confusion and alarm. "You taught me that failure doesn't define who you are," he replied simply. "That lesson was worth more than all the piano lessons in the world." The pilot announced they would begin descent in 10 minutes. Clara looked out the window and saw, instead of the expected lights of Vienna, the shimmer of the Atlantic under the setting sun. "Where are we?" she asked, a mixture of fascination and apprehension growing within her. "Ilha Bella," replied Joaum. "I have a property here, and a Steinway piano that has gone too long without being played by expert hands." Clara should have felt manipulated, even deceived. But instead, a strange sensation of anticipation was taking hold of her, as if she were about to begin a musical piece whose score she didn't yet know. "The Vienna competition," she began, but the words faded when she understood that she had already made her decision upon boarding that plane. "There are more ways to demonstrate your talent than a competition," said Joaum softly. "Sometimes, Clara, the most beautiful music arises from improvisations, not from carefully rehearsed scores." The plane descended toward the private runway, and Clara felt she was descending toward a completely new chapter of her life. Joaum Montero's property turned out to be much more than a simple beach house. It was an elegant Mediterranean villa situated on a cliff, with panoramic views of the sea and surrounded by gardens that descended in terraces to a small private cove. The golden light of dusk bathed the white walls and terracotta roofs, giving the place an almost unreal air. "Welcome to Villa Harmonica," said Joaum as the car stopped in front of the main entrance. "I hope you find your stay comfortable." Clara descended from the vehicle, overwhelmed by the beauty of the place and the strange sense of unreality that had enveloped her since she had accepted that ticket at the airport. "It's impressive," she managed to say while a sea breeze played with her hair, habitually tied in a severe bun but now loosened by the hours of travel. Joaum smiled with evident satisfaction. "Wait until you see the piano," he replied with a gleam in his eyes. "Although perhaps you'd prefer to rest first, it's been a long day." "I would like to freshen up, yes," admitted Clara. The adrenaline of the events was beginning to dissipate, giving way to a fatigue that was settling heavily in her bones. An older woman with a kind appearance approached them. "This is Donna Dulce," Joaum introduced. "She takes care of the house when I'm here. She will show you to your room." Clara followed Donna Dulce through a spacious foyer decorated with exquisite taste, but without ostentation. Contemporary artworks alternated with carefully selected antiques. The house reflected a complex personality, thought Clara, like its owner. The room that had been assigned to her was spacious and luminous, with a balcony that offered an uninterrupted view of the Atlantic. A small suitcase, her luggage for the Vienna competition, had already been placed on an elegant bench at the foot of the bed. "The master has arranged everything for your comfort," said Donna Dulce with a warm smile. "If you need anything, just ask." When the woman withdrew, Clara approached the balcony and breathed deeply. The salty air, so different from the urban air of São Paulo, seemed to dispel for a moment the doubts that were beginning to assail her. What was she doing here in the house of a former student she barely remembered? Should she be in Vienna, preparing for her performance? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was Helena. "Clara, finally. I've called you 1,000 times. Where are you? Did you arrive safely in Vienna?" The concern in her sister's voice made Clara feel guilty for not having contacted her earlier. "Helena, She hesitated, not knowing how to explain the strange chain of events. "I'm not in Vienna." "What? What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Clara reassured her. "I missed the flight, but it's complicated. I'm in Ilhabela." The silence on the other end of the line reflected Helena's perplexity. "In Ilhabela? How? Why?" "Clara, have you gone crazy? The competition." Clara sighed. Trying to explain to Helena what she herself didn't completely understand was an impossible task at that moment. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow, I promise. Now I need to rest." After reassuring her sister several more times that she was fine and had not been kidnapped, Clara hung up and headed to the bathroom for a shower. The hot water seemed to wash away part of the accumulated tension, but the questions persisted, floating like unresolved notes in an unfinished composition. After changing into the clothes she had prepared for her first night in Vienna, a simple black dress that now seemed excessively formal for the relaxed environment of the villa, Clara decided to explore the house a bit before dinner. Following the sound of voices, she arrived at a spacious terrace where João was conversing with another man. Both raised their eyes when she appeared, and Clara felt the ground sway beneath her feet. There, next to João, was a face she hadn't seen in 15 years, but which had been part of her dreams and nightmares for a long time afterward. Mateus Alves, her ex-fiancé. Mateus seemed as surprised as she was. He rose abruptly, spilling part of his drink. "Clara!" His voice, deeper than she remembered, contained a mixture of incredulity and something more that she couldn't identify. "I see you already know each other," observed João, his expression indecipherable. Clara remained motionless, unable to process what was happening. Mateus, the man she had loved with the intensity of youth, the man who had left her for an opportunity in the United States when she had decided to stay to care for her ill parents, was now before her, as real as the ground beneath her feet. "Mateus is the artistic director of the Coastal Music Festival that I sponsor each year," explained João, carefully observing the reaction of both. "We were discussing the details of this year's program." Mateus seemed to have recovered part of his composure. "Clara," he said, approaching cautiously, as if afraid she might vanish. "I can't believe you're here. It's been many years." 15, she replied automatically, her voice firmer than she expected. "It's been 15 years, Mateus." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. João, apparently oblivious to the tension, or perhaps secretly enjoying it, raised his glass. "This deserves a celebration," he declared. "It's not every day that two extraordinary musical talents meet under my roof." Clara gave João a penetrating look. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. Had he orchestrated this meeting? And for what purpose? "Did you know Mateus would be here?" she asked directly. João smiled, that enigmatic smile that was beginning to irritate her. "Destiny has its own methods, Clara," he replied. "I only provide the setting." Mateus seemed equally confused. "João never mentioned you were coming," he said. "This is unexpected." Clara didn't know whether to believe them. The feeling of being manipulated grew with each moment. "I think I need some air," she said, heading toward the gardens without waiting for a response. She walked away quickly, descending a stone path that serpentined between olive trees and bougainvillea. Night had fallen completely, and the full moon cast silver shadows on the landscape. "True coincidences are as rare as true accidents," thought Clara, another phrase from her mother that now resonated with new relevance. Footsteps behind her made her turn. Mateus was approaching with a cautious expression. "Clara," he began, "I know this is strange. It is for me too." She crossed her arms, creating an invisible barrier between them. "What are you doing here, Mateus?" In Ilhabela, working for João Monteiro. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar that Clara felt a sharp pain in her chest. After New York, I came back to Brazil looking for new opportunities. I met João at a charity event in São Paulo a few years ago. He was looking for someone to direct his festival, and I needed a change. Clara nodded slowly, assimilating the information. And your wife? Marta, right? She asked, surprised by the ease with which the name came to her lips after so many years. Mateus's expression darkened. We divorced 3 years ago, he replied dryly. It turned out New York wasn't the paradise she expected. A silence loaded with meaning settled between them. In the distance, the waves broke against the rocks with a constant rhythm, like a natural metronome marking time. I'm sorry, said Clara finally, not knowing exactly why she was apologizing. Mateus came a little closer, and the moonlight revealed the lines that years had carved in his face, making him more interesting, more defined. And you? He asked softly. Your sister told me years ago that you had refused an international tour to care for your parents. Did you continue with your classes at the conservatory? Clara felt a pang of resentment at the thought that Helena had maintained contact with Mateus without telling her. My parents passed away 6 years ago, she replied, and yes, I continued giving lessons, but this year I was going to participate in the International Vienna competition. Was, repeated Mateus, noting the verb tense. Clara looked at the illuminated house in the distance, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken in the last few hours. I missed the flight, she explained, and then João appeared with a ticket for a private flight that, as it turns out, wasn't going to Vienna but here. Mateus frowned, visibly confused. João brought you here. Why? Apparently I was his piano teacher 30 years ago, replied Clara, with a small incredulous laugh. One summer in Rio. Mateus's expression changed, a realization dawning in his eyes. The mayor's son, he murmured. João once mentioned that a teacher had saved him from abandoning music completely. I never imagined it was you. Clara shivered slightly when a cooler breeze blew in from the sea. The world is smaller than it seems, she commented. Mateus took off his jacket and, in a gesture that evoked times past, placed it over Clara's shoulders. Or perhaps, he said with a melancholic smile, there are simply stories that remained unfinished. Clara didn't respond, but she didn't reject the jacket. Mateus's scent, surprisingly familiar after so many years, enveloped her like a forgotten melody that suddenly returns to memory. From the terrace, invisible to them, João Monteiro observed the scene with an inscrutable expression, raising his glass in a silent toast before turning and returning to the interior of the villa. The morning sun filtered through the curtains when Clara opened her eyes. For a moment, disoriented, she expected to see the familiar walls of her apartment in São Paulo. Instead, the splendor of the Atlantic greeted her from the open window, along with the distant sound of waves. The reality of her situation hit her again. She was in the villa of a former student she barely remembered. She had lost her opportunity in the Vienna competition, and if that weren't enough, she had reunited with Mateus, the man who had broken her heart 15 years ago. Clara sat up, running a hand through her disheveled hair. What was she doing here? Should she call a taxi, go to the nearest airport, and put an end to this madness? A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said, straightening up and adjusting her robe over her pajamas. Donna Dulce entered with a breakfast tray, freshly squeezed juice, steaming coffee, warm croissants, and fresh fruit. Good morning, ma'am, she greeted with a warm smile. Mr. Monteiro thought you would prefer to have breakfast in private this morning. He asked me to tell you that he will wait for you in the main hall when you're ready. There's something he wants to show you. Clara appreciated the gesture. She wasn't prepared to face Mateus so early, and she needed time to organize her thoughts. After breakfast and dressing in simple clothes, light pants and a white blouse she had packed for her free days in Vienna, Clara headed to the main hall following Donna Dulce's directions. Upon entering, she stopped abruptly. In the center of the room, bathed in light pouring from an arched window, was one of the most beautiful pianos she had ever seen, a full-size Steinway Grand, black and shiny, with yellowish ivory keys that revealed its antiquity and value. It belonged to my grandfather, said João's voice from a corner of the room where he sat observing her. one of the few family treasures that mattered enough to me to preserve. Clara approached the instrument with reverence, passing her fingers gently over the polished wood. "It's magnificent," she murmured. "May I—" "Please," encouraged Joan, rising. "It has been waiting for hands like yours for a long time." Clara sat on the bench, automatically adjusting her posture. Her fingers rested on the keys, feeling their weight, their response. She began with tentative notes that soon transformed into the first measures of Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9, No. 2. The acoustics of the room were perfect, and the sound of the piano, rich and deep, seemed to fill every corner. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself be carried away by the music, momentarily forgetting where she was and why. When the last note faded into the air, she opened her eyes to find Joan looking at her with an indecipherable expression. "Extraordinary," he said softly. "It's as if time hasn't passed." Clara wasn't sure if he was referring to her interpretation or to something more personal. "The piano is perfectly tuned," she commented, surprised. "I have it tuned regularly, even though no one plays it," explained Joan. "Some things deserve to be maintained in perfect condition, even in the absence of their original purpose." There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't only talking about the piano. Clara suddenly felt uncomfortable under his scrutinizing gaze. "Joan," she began, determined to clarify the situation, "I appreciate your hospitality, but I don't understand why I'm here. What do you expect from me?" He smiled, that enigmatic smile that seemed to be his signature. "Is it so difficult to believe that I simply wanted to return a favor? You helped me at a crucial moment in my life. I thought perhaps I could do the same for you." "By taking me away from the most important competition of my career?" retorted Clara, a flash of irritation in her voice. "Sometimes opportunities come disguised as losses," he replied calmly. "The festival that Mateus is organizing could be a much more significant platform than a competition. The Vienna judges are notoriously conservative, favoring technique over emotion. Your interpretation of Chopin is too passionate for their taste." Clara looked at him with surprise. His assessment was surprisingly accurate. Her teachers had always told her that her Chopin was too romantic, too personal. "You've investigated quite a bit about me," she observed. "As I told you, I've followed your career," admitted Joan. "Perhaps with more attention than you might imagine." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Mateus entered, stopping when he saw them by the piano. "Sorry," he apologized. "I didn't know you were here." "Come in, Mateus," invited Joan. "I was just telling Clara about the festival. I think she would be a perfect addition to the program." Mateus looked at Clara with a mixture of surprise and something that could be hope. "Would you play in the festival?" he asked directly. Clara felt trapped between the two men, their expectations weighing on her like a complex score. "I haven't said yes," she clarified, rising from the piano bench. "I don't even know how long I'm going to stay here." "At least until tomorrow," intervened Joan. "There's a small celebration in the village, the Sea Festival, music, dance, local traditions. I think you would find it interesting." Clara thought about São Paulo, her empty apartment, the competition she had lost anyway. Helena would surely be fine for a few more days. "All right," she finally conceded. "I'll stay until tomorrow, then I'll decide." Joan's smile widened, as if he had obtained exactly the response he expected. "Perfect," he said, heading towards the door. "I'll leave you to discuss the details of the festival. I have some matters to attend to." When he left, an uncomfortable silence settled between Clara and Mateus. "You don't have to participate if you don't want to," he finally said. Joan can be persuasive. Clara sat down at the piano again, absently touching some notes. "What is it like to work for him?" she asked. Mateus approached, maintaining a prudent distance. "Challenging, demanding, but also incredibly generous," he replied after thinking about it. "He has a very clear vision of what he wants, but gives artistic freedom once he trusts you." "And does he trust you?" inquired Clara, looking at him directly. A shadow crossed Mateus's face. "I think so. Although with João you can never be completely sure. He always seems to have an additional plan, a card up his sleeve." Clara nodded, thoughtful. The description perfectly matched the impression she was forming of her host. "And the festival?" she asked, returning to more professional ground. "What kind of event is it?" Mateus's face lit up as he talked about his project. "It's unique," he said enthusiastically. It combines classical music with traditional Brazilian elements. We attract artists from all over the world, but we also highlight local talent. It takes place in an open-air amphitheater by the sea. The acoustics are incredible, and when you play at sunset, with the sun sinking into the Atlantic—" He stopped, visibly moved by the image he was describing. "It sounds beautiful," admitted Clara, touched by his passion. "It is," confirmed Mateus, "and it would be an honor to have you as a guest soloist." Their eyes met, and for a moment Clara felt the years vanish. The same intensity, the same connection they had shared in their youth was still there, buried beneath layers of experiences and disappointments, but still alive. "I'll think about it," she promised, averting her gaze first. "But now, if you don't mind, I'd like to practice a bit." "Alone?" Mateus nodded, understanding her need for space. "Of course," he said, heading toward the door. At the threshold he stopped and added, without turning, "It's good to see you play again, Clara. It was always like seeing your soul laid bare." When the door closed behind him, Clara remained motionless for several minutes. Then slowly, her fingers returned to the keys and she began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece she hadn't performed in years. It was Mateus's favorite when they were together, and he used to joke that every time she played it, it was as if she were telling him all her secrets. On the terrace, where he had gone to smoke a cigarette, Mateus listened, a melancholic smile forming on his face as the notes floated in the marine air, laden with unspoken emotions and unfulfilled promises. The Sea Festival turned out to be much more than a simple local celebration. The entire coastal village seemed to have transformed. The narrow streets were decorated with garlands of lights and flowers, small stalls offered crafts and local culinary delights, and in every square there were musicians playing traditional melodies that invited dancing. Clara walked alongside João, absorbing the festive atmosphere with a mixture of curiosity and delight. She had spent so much time locked in her disciplined routine in São Paulo that she had almost forgotten how it felt to let herself be carried away by the simple pleasure of a warm night full of music. "In this region, music is not something that is studied or perfected," commented João as they passed a group of elderly men playing guitars and bandurias with enthusiasm, though not always with precision. "It's something that is lived, that flows as naturally as breathing." Clara observed a middle-aged couple dancing with abandon, their movements imperfect but full of contagious joy. "There's something beautiful in that spontaneity," she admitted, "although my classical training makes me notice every out-of-tune note." João laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his usually serious face. "That's precisely why I brought you here," he said, "to remind you that music exists beyond concert halls and prestigious competitions. Sometimes, the most imperfect interpretation is the one that provokes the most emotions." They continued their walk, occasionally stopping to try local tapas or admire the work of some artisan. Clara was surprised to find herself enjoying João's company. Behind his enigmatic facade and cryptic comments, there was a cultured man with a sharp sense of humor and an extraordinary capacity for observation. "Where is Mateus?" asked Clara when they sat down on the terrace of a small cafe with a view of the sea. "I thought he would join us." "He had to finalize some details of the festival," replied João, gesturing to the waiter to order drinks. "Although I suspect he also wanted to give us space to talk." Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Talk about what, exactly?" João studied her for a moment before responding. "About the future, Clara. About possibilities that perhaps you haven't considered." The waiter arrived with 2 glasses of local white wine. João waited for him to withdraw before continuing. "I recently acquired the Villa Lobos Conservatory in Rio de Janeiro," he revealed. "A respectable institution, but one that needs a new artistic direction, someone with vision and experience." Clara looked at him with surprise. The direction of a prestigious conservatory was something many musicians dreamed of, a position that offered stability and professional respect. "Are you offering me a job?" she asked directly. "I'm offering you an opportunity," corrected João. "The opportunity to influence the next generation of musicians, to create a program that combines technical excellence with the passion that has always characterized your interpretation." Clara took a sip of wine, allowing herself a few moments to process the offer. "Why me?" she asked finally. "There are musicians with more renown, directors with more administrative experience." "Because you understand what I understood too late," replied Joan with sudden intensity. That technique without emotion is empty, but emotion without discipline is chaotic. You found that balance in your teaching 30 years ago, with a terrified boy who thought he had nothing to offer the world. Clara felt an unexpected emotion at his words. The idea of directing a conservatory had never been part of her plans, which had always focused on her career as a performer. However, there was something tempting about the proposal, especially after years of feeling that her talents were being wasted in routine classes. "It's a very generous offer," she said cautiously, "but we barely know each other, Joan. How can you be so sure that I'm the right person?" Joan's expression softened. "Sometimes, Clara, we know a person in a brief encounter better than those with whom we share decades. Your impact on my life was brief, but profound. And I've followed your career enough to know that you have exactly what the conservatory needs." Before Clara could respond, an explosion of applause and louder music attracted her attention. In the small square in front of the cafe, a circle had formed where several couples were dancing to the rhythm of a cheerful traditional melody. "Come," said Joan, rising and extending his hand to her. "Tonight is for celebrating, not for important decisions." Clara hesitated. It had been so long since she had allowed herself something as simple and carefree as dancing. "I don't know the steps," she objected weakly. "No one expects perfection here," he replied with a smile. "Only joy." Something in his words resonated deeply with Clara. With a sudden decision, she took his hand and let herself be guided to the improvised dance floor. The music, a mixture of samba and regional rhythms, pulsed with vital energy. Clara briefly observed the other couples and tried to imitate their movements. At first she felt awkward, too conscious of each step, each turn. "Don't think," advised Joan, reading her expression. "Feel the rhythm, like when you interpret Chopin. Let the music guide you." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the music instead of analyzing it. Little by little, her movements became more fluid, more natural. A surprised laugh escaped her lips when Joan unexpectedly made her twirl. "That's it," he encouraged her, his eyes shining with approval. "Now you're really dancing." For a moment, Clara felt completely free, liberated from the weight of expectations and the perfection she had always imposed upon herself. It was an intoxicating sensation, almost as powerful as what she experienced in her best performances at the piano. When the music ended, she found herself breathless and smiling broadly. Applause erupted around them, and Clara made a small, playful curtsy, infected by the festive spirit. Upon straightening up, her gaze crossed with Mateus's, who was observing her from the edge of the square with an indecipherable expression. For an instant, Clara's joy faltered, replaced by a more complex and difficult emotion to name. Joan followed the direction of her gaze and nodded slightly. "Go to him," he said softly. "I think you have a lot to talk about." Clara hesitated, surprised by his perspicacity. "Are you sure? You came with us to the festival." "I'll be fine," Joan reassured her. "I have some acquaintances here. Besides," he added with a wink, "the best compositions always include moments of resolution after tension." With a final squeeze of her hand, Joan disappeared into the crowd, leaving Clara alone in the middle of the square. After a moment of hesitation, she headed toward Mateus. "I didn't know you danced," he commented when she approached. There was a tone in his voice that Clara couldn't quite decipher. "Neither did I," she admitted with a small smile. "It seems I'm discovering many new things these days." Mateus nodded, his expression softening. "You looked happy," he said. "It reminded me of the Clara I knew years ago, before both of us lost ourselves in our ambitions." His words touched something deep within her, a truth she had been ignoring for too long. "Shall we take a walk on the beach?" suggested Mateus, pointing toward the torch-lit path that descended to the shore. "The music here is wonderful, but makes conversation difficult." Clara nodded, and they began to walk in silence, gradually leaving behind the bustle of the festival. The night was perfect, warm but refreshed by the sea breeze, the sky clear, revealing a multitude of stars. When they reached the beach, Mateus took off his shoes and invited Clara to do the same. She hesitated briefly before removing hers, feeling the still warm sand beneath her feet. A simple but surprisingly pleasant sensation. They walked along the shoreline, the water occasionally lapping at their feet. "Do you remember our first date?" Mateus suddenly asked. "In Ibirapuera Park by the lake." Clara smiled at the memory. "You wore a ridiculously formal blue shirt for a paddle boat ride," she replied, "and we almost capsized when you tried to kiss me." Mateus laughed, the sound blending harmoniously with the rumble of the waves. "I was so nervous," he confessed. "The brilliant Clara Santos, the star of the conservatory, had agreed to go out with me. I couldn't believe my luck. The memory was sweet, without the edge of bitterness that Clara would have expected. The years seemed to have softened the edges of their shared history. What happened to us, Mateus?" she asked softly, the question she had kept for 15 years finally finding voice. He stopped, looking toward the horizon, where the sea merged with the night sky. "Life," he replied simply. "Our dreams took different paths. Your family needed you here. And I was too obsessed with succeeding in the United States. We could have tried," Clara pointed out. "The distance wasn't insurmountable." Mateus looked at her, raw honesty in his eyes. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of not being enough, that your talent would always shine brighter than mine. I was young and stupid, and I thought I needed to prove myself before being worthy of you." The confession surprised Clara. She had always assumed that Mateus had left her simply because his career was more important. She had never considered that his own insecurities had played a role. "I was afraid too," she confessed in turn. "Afraid of being abandoned like my mother when she chose music over family. That's why I stayed, why I prioritized my responsibilities over my dreams. And in the end, I ended up with neither." They looked at each other in the darkness, the raw honesty creating a new kind of intimacy between them. "It's not too late, you know," said Mateus softly. "For music. Your interpretation is still extraordinary. The festival would be the perfect stage for your return." Clara thought about João's offer, about the conservatory in Rio, about the different directions her life could take from this point. "Music never abandoned me," she replied. "Even in my darkest moments, it was always there. Perhaps now is the time to rediscover what it truly means to me, beyond competitions and applause." Mateus nodded, understanding. "And us?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of the waves. "Is it also too late for us?" Clara didn't have a clear answer. The feelings that Mateus awakened in her were complex, a mixture of nostalgia, affection, and an old pain not completely healed. "I don't know," she replied honestly. 15 years have passed, Mateus. We're different people now." "Then perhaps we should get to know each other again," he suggested, a cautious hope in his voice. "Without expectations, without the weight of the past. Just two people discovering if there's still music when they're together." The metaphor drew a smile from Clara. They had always spoken of their relationship in musical terms. "A new arrangement of a familiar piece," she murmured. "Exactly," confirmed Mateus, smiling in turn. The sea breeze intensified, bringing with it the salty aroma of the sea and the distant echoes of the festive music from the village. Clara felt a strange peace enveloping her, as if after years of struggling against the current, she was finally learning to float. "I would like that," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. Mateus extended his hand, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. Clara took it, and they continued their walk along the shore, their silhouettes outlined against the starry horizon, while the waves marked the rhythm of a melody that was beginning to be composed anew. The days at Villa Harmonica gradually acquired their own rhythm, different from everything Clara had known in her structured life in São Paulo. Mornings began early, with the tropical sun filtering through the windows and the sound of waves as a constant soundtrack. Clara maintained her daily practice discipline, but now did so on the majestic Steinway in the main hall, often with the doors to the balcony open so the sea breeze could caress the notes. Sometimes, while she played, she noticed João observing her silently from the entrance, his expression always inscrutable but attentive. Other times it was Mateus who sat discreetly in a corner, closing his eyes to absorb each note, as he had done during their years as enamored students. This morning, however, Clara was alone with the piano, deeply immersed in a piece by Villa-Lobos when the phone interrupted her concentration. It was her friend Larissa, finally responding to the messages Clara had left days ago. "Clara, finally I reach you. Helena is so worried. She says you're in Ilhabela with a mysterious millionaire instead of in Vienna. What's going on?" Clara sighed, moving away from the piano. Larissa had been her best friend since university. the only person besides Helena who knew the details of her history with Mateus. "It's complicated, Larissa," she replied, as she headed to the balcony for more privacy. "I missed my flight to Vienna and met João Monteiro, a former student who now turns out to be a successful businessman. He offered to bring me here, and in a moment of madness I accepted." "That doesn't sound like the Clara I know," observed Larissa with evident surprise in her voice. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how to explain the complex feelings that had arisen in these days. "There's more," she finally admitted. "Mateus is here too." The silence on the other end of the line was eloquent. "Mateus? You're Mateus?" asked Larissa finally, incredulity tinging every word. "He's not my Mateus anymore, Larissa," corrected Clara, though without the bitterness she would have expected to feel. "But yes, the same. He works for João, directing a music festival." "That's too much coincidence to be casual," opined Larissa with suspicion. "Do you think this João planned it all?" Clara contemplated the sea, brilliant under the morning sun, while considering the question. "Probably," she acknowledged, "although his motivations remain a mystery." "And how do you feel seeing Mateus again after so long?" asked Larissa, going directly to the heart of the matter as she always did. Clara smiled at her friend's frankness. "Confused," she admitted. "There are moments when it seems the years haven't passed, that we're still those students full of dreams and passion. And then I remember how it all ended. The pain, the abandoned dreams." "Time changes people, Clara," said Larissa softly. "Perhaps he has matured." "Perhaps," conceded Clara. "We've talked a lot these days, about the past, about what went wrong. It's been healing, in a way." "And what about the Vienna competition? Have you completely given it up?" The question made Clara tense. It was something she had been avoiding thinking about directly. "It's too late for that now," she replied, "but João has offered me the direction of the Villa Lobos Conservatory in Rio, and Mateus wants me to perform as a guest soloist in his festival." "Wow!" exclaimed Larissa, clearly impressed. "It seems opportunities are raining down since you left São Paulo. Have you made any decisions yet?" Clara shook her head, though Larissa couldn't see her. "Not yet. Everything has happened so quickly. I need time to think, to be sure that any decision I make is for the right reasons." "I understand," assured Larissa, "but Clara, just remember, you've spent the last 15 years putting everyone else ahead of yourself. Maybe it's time to think about what you really want." Larissa's words stayed with Clara long after ending the call. What did she really want? The question seemed simple, but the answer eluded her like a half-remembered melody. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Clara decided to take a walk through the gardens of the villa to clear her ideas. The path wound between ancient olive trees and blooming bougainvillea, gradually descending toward the small private cove. To her surprise, she found João sitting on a stone bench beside a small pond, apparently lost in his own thoughts. "Sorry," said Clara, ready to withdraw. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," he reassured her, indicating that she should sit beside him. "In fact, I was thinking about you." Clara took a seat, curious. "About me? Why?" João observed the water in the pond, where some colorful fish swam lazily. "I was remembering that summer in Rio," he replied, "how you transformed my perception of music and, unknowingly, the course of my life." Clara looked at him with renewed interest. Despite the days spent in his company, João remained largely an enigma to her. "How exactly did I do that?" she asked. "They were just a few piano lessons." João smiled, a smile different from his usual enigmatic expression, more open and vulnerable. "My father was an ambitious and relentless man," he began, his voice adopting a more personal tone than usual. "As mayor, he expected his only son to be perfect in everything. The piano was just one of many activities in which I had to excel to maintain the appearances of the perfect family." Clara listened attentively, beginning to better understand the boy she had known briefly so many years ago. "I hated piano lessons," continued João. "I hated feeling exposed, vulnerable, judged, until you came and, for the first time, someone asked me what I felt when I played, not just whether I was playing the correct notes." "I remember you liked Debussy," said Clara softly, the memory returning in fragments. "I let you choose what you wanted to learn, instead of following the strict program." João nodded, his gaze still fixed on the pond. "You told me something I never forgot," he continued. "Music is not to please others, João. It's to express what you can't say with words." No one had given me permission to feel my own emotions before. Clara felt a wave of emotion as she understood the impact that her words had had on that lonely boy. "After you left," continued João, "I kept practicing in secret, not to please my father but for myself. Music became my refuge during my parents' divorce, during the difficult years that followed." "I never imagined," began Clara, moved. "Of course not," he interrupted her gently. "How could you know? You were a young teacher giving your first steps. But that's the beauty of teaching, Clara. You never really know the impact you might have." His words resonated deeply with her, especially in light of the conservatory offer. "What happened afterward?" she asked, genuinely interested in his story. "Life," he replied with an ironic smile. "I studied economics because it was the sensible thing to do, built companies, succeeded according to my father's standards. But music was always there, in the background, reminding me that there was something more than balance sheets and acquisitions." João finally turned to look at her directly, his green eyes unusually expressive. "When I learned you would participate in the Vienna competition, I felt it was time to close the circle, to thank you for what you didn't even know you had done." Clara processed his words, moved by the sincerity she felt in them. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said finally. "It helps to understand why I'm here." "And have you decided how long you'll stay?" asked João, returning to his more casual tone. Clara sighed, Larissa's question returning to her mind. "I still don't know," she confessed. "All this, the villa, the festival, the conservatory, Matthias, is very different from the life I had planned." "Sometimes the best movements in life are those we don't plan," observed João, "like an improvised cadenza in the middle of a structured concerto." The musical metaphor drew a smile from Clara. "You always speak in riddles," she commented. "It's a hard habit to break," he admitted with a wink. "But speaking plainly, I would like you to consider staying at least until the festival. I believe it could be a transformative experience for you." Before Clara could respond, the sound of footsteps on the path announced the arrival of Donna Dulce. "Excuse me, ma'am," said the housekeeper, addressing Clara. "You have an important call. Your sister Helena, she says it's urgent." Clara tensed immediately. Helena never called through the house line unless it was really important. "I must take this," she said, rising quickly. João nodded, understanding. "Of course. You can use the phone in my office for privacy." Clara followed Donna Dolce back to the house, an uneasy presentiment forming within her. When she finally picked up the receiver, Helena's voice confirmed her fears. "Clara, I'm so sorry for interrupting your... whatever you're doing there," began her sister, her voice tense. "But we have a problem. The bank has rejected the mortgage payment. Apparently, there's been a problem with the last 3 payments." Clara frowned, confused. "How is that possible? We always leave enough money in the joint account." The silence on the other end of the line was revealing. "Helena," said Clara, a warning tone in her voice, "what aren't you telling me?" Her sister audibly sighed. "I've had some financial problems lately," she finally admitted. "I lost my job 3 months ago and didn't want to worry you with the competition so close." 3 months? Exclaimed Clara, incredulous. "You've been unemployed for 3 months and didn't tell me?" "I thought I would find another job quickly," defended Helena. "And then, when the situation prolonged, I didn't want to distract you. You've always sacrificed so much for me." Clara closed her eyes, trying to control her frustration. It was true that she had always protected Helena, perhaps too much. "How much do we owe?" she finally asked, going straight to the point. The amount Helena mentioned made Clara sit heavily in the office chair. It was a considerable sum, accumulated by months of late payments and penalty interest. "We don't have that much money, Helena," said Clara, the reality of their situation hitting her hard. "Not after the competition expenses." "I know," replied her sister, the guilt evident in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I always end up complicating your life." Clara felt the room spin around her. The apartment in São Paulo was the only thing left from their parents, the only family heritage they had managed to preserve. The idea of losing it was unbearable. "I'll see what I can do," she said finally. "I'll call you tomorrow." After hanging up, Clara remained seated in silence, the reality of her situation finally clear before her eyes. The past few days had been like a dream, a pause in her real life, full of responsibilities and worries. But now the outside world had broken into her bubble, reminding her of who she really was and what her obligations were. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mateus. "Everything okay?" he asked, his face showing genuine concern. Donna Dulce mentioned an urgent call. Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her problems private, as she had always done. But another part, perhaps the part that was learning to open up in these days by the sea, needed to share the burden. "Not really," she admitted. "It's the apartment in Sao Paulo. We're at risk of losing it due to late payments." Mateus entered the office, closing the door softly behind him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice full of empathy. "Is there anything I can do?" Clara shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "Unless you know how to get a considerable sum of money in a short time, I don't think so." A thoughtful expression crossed Mateus's face. "The festival," he said suddenly. "Guest soloists receive a significant honorarium. If you agree to participate—" Clara looked at him with surprise. "Would it be enough?" she asked, a ray of hope forming. "Almost," he replied honestly. "And I'm sure João could advance part of the salary from the conservatory if you decide to accept his offer." The mention of the conservatory made Clara tense. João's offer now appeared in a new light, not as an artistic opportunity, but as a financial solution. "I don't want to make such important decisions based on a financial emergency," she said, more to herself than to Mateus. He came closer, taking her hands in his in a gesture of support. "I know," he said softly, "and I understand that feeling better than anyone. But sometimes, Clara, life doesn't give us the luxury of separating our practical needs from our artistic aspirations." His words, though not what she wanted to hear, resonated with truth. Throughout her life, Clara had struggled with this very tension, the desire to dedicate herself fully to music versus the family and economic responsibilities that never disappeared. "I'll talk to João," she finally decided. "About the festival, at least. The conservatory, I need more time to consider it." Mateus nodded, understanding. "It's a wise decision," he approved. "And in the meantime, if you need a personal loan to solve the immediate issue—" Clara felt a wave of gratitude at his offer, but her pride spoke first. "Thank you, but I can't accept that," she said firmly. "I'll find a solution." Mateus didn't insist, respecting her decision. Instead, he kept her hands in his, offering a silent comfort that Clara found surprisingly reassuring. In that moment, with the weight of her responsibilities reminding her of who she really was, Clara realized that the days at Villa Harmonica had been more than a simple interlude in her structured life. They had been an awakening, a reminder that she still had her own dreams, desires that had been in the background for too long. The question was whether she could find a path that would allow her to honor both her responsibilities and her aspirations, or if, as always, she would have to sacrifice one for the other. The storm came without warning, turning the idyllic Mediterranean afternoon into chaos of wind and rain. From her room window, Clara observed how the waves, previously docile, now rose furiously against the rocks of the private cove. The sudden change in weather seemed to reflect the turbulence of her own thoughts. After her conversation with Mateus, Clara had decided to speak with João about her participation in the festival, but had not been able to find him. According to Donna Dulce, he had left early for a business meeting in Santos and would not return until evening. The phone rang again. This time, it was Larissa. "Clara, I have to tell you something," began her friend, without the usual greetings. Her voice sounded tense, as if she were about to confess something difficult. "What is it?" asked Clara, intrigued by Larissa's unusual tone. "It's about Mateus," continued Larissa, hesitating briefly before proceeding. "I should have told you before, but we've kept in touch all these years." Clara felt a pang of betrayal, though she wasn't sure if it was rational to feel that way. "Contact?" she repeated, waiting for clarification. "Not constantly," Larissa quickly explained. "At first they were just occasional emails, questions about you, about how you were doing. Then when he returned to Brazil a few years ago, we met a few times in Sao Paulo when he came for work." "Why didn't you tell me?" asked Clara, trying to keep calm in her voice. Larissa sighed on the other end of the line. "At first because I knew it would hurt you. Later, I guess too much time had passed and it became uncomfortable to mention it," she admitted. But now that he's back in your life, I felt you should know. Clara processed this new information, trying to determine how she felt about it. Was she upset because her best friend had maintained secret communication with her ex-fiancé, or because somehow this meant that Mateus had never completely left her behind as she had believed? "What did you talk about?" she finally asked, curiosity overcoming her initial discomfort. "Music, mainly," replied Larissa. "His work, his travels, and yes, sometimes about you, though I tried not to give too many details. He always respected that you didn't want contact with him." Clara recalled Mateus's words during their walk on the beach, his admission of having been afraid, of feeling insecure. Had he been sincere, or was there a different story he wasn't telling her? "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Clara. "Because I know you," replied Larissa frankly. "And I know you're considering letting Mateus back into your life. You deserve to have all the information before making that decision." The response was typical of Larissa. Direct, honest, always prioritizing what she considered best for Clara, even if it meant revealing her own secrets. "Thank you for telling me," Clara finally said, realizing she wasn't really angry. "I have a lot to think about." After hanging up, Clara remained by the window, watching the storm intensify. Lightning occasionally illuminated the darkened sky, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. The villa seemed strangely silent, with most of the staff having departed early to avoid the flooded roads. A knock on her door startled her. "Come in," she said, expecting to see Donna Dulce. Instead, it was Mateus who entered, his hair and clothes slightly damp from the rain. "Sorry for the interruption," he said, staying near the door as if unsure of his welcome. "Donna Dulce asked me to let you know that dinner will be ready in an hour. It seems that tonight it will be just us. João called to say he'll stay in Santos until the storm passes." Clara nodded, grateful for the information but unable to ignore Larissa's revelation. "Thank you," she replied simply, turning her gaze back to the window. Mateus seemed to notice her change in attitude. "Is everything okay?" he asked, taking a tentative step toward her. Clara hesitated, debating whether to avoid the confrontation or directly address what she had just discovered. "I just spoke with Larissa," she said finally, deciding on honesty. The immediate understanding in Mateus's face confirmed her suspicions. He knew exactly what she was referring to. "Ah," he said simply, "I guess she told you about our contact." "Yes," confirmed Clara, studying his reaction. "Why did you never mention it?" Mateus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that Clara recognized as a sign of his nervousness. "I didn't know how to bring it up," he admitted, "and I was afraid you would think there was something more between Larissa and me, or that I had been investigating you through her." "And wasn't that the case?" pressed Clara. "I asked about you, yes," he acknowledged without evasion. "I wanted to know if you were okay, if you were happy. But Larissa was always discreet, never giving me details that she felt invaded your privacy." Clara assimilated this information, unsure of how to interpret it. "What else haven't you told me, Mateus?" she asked, realizing this was the opportunity to clarify any other hidden truth between them. Mateus seemed to carefully consider his response. "There is something else," he finally admitted. "Something about João that perhaps you should know." Clara felt her heart accelerate at the mention of her host. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't think your meeting at the airport was casual," said Mateus, choosing his words carefully. "João has followed your career for years, much more closely than he has mentioned to you. He has a collection of recordings of you, articles, programs of your recitals. I discovered it accidentally a few months ago in his private office in Rio." The revelation left Clara momentarily speechless. The idea that João had been following her career with such dedication was both disturbing and, somehow, moving. "Why would he do that?" she finally asked. "I don't know for certain," replied Mateus honestly. "João is complex. When I asked him about it, he said something enigmatic about debts of the past and changed the subject. But I'm sure his interest in you goes beyond a few piano lessons 30 years ago." Clara recalled João's words in the garden, his story about how she had changed his perception of music. Was it possible that this brief encounter had left such a deep and lasting impression? "Do you think he has other motives?" she asked, not sure what answer she expected. Mateus shook his head. "Not in the sense you're thinking," he assured. "João isn't like that. I think his admiration for you is genuine, but I also think there are parts of his story that he hasn't shared with you. A particularly close lightning bolt illuminated the room, followed almost immediately by a crash that made the window glass vibrate. The lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing. It seems the storm is worsening, commented Mateus, looking outside. We should go downstairs before we completely lose electricity. Clara nodded, grateful for the change of subject. She needed time to process these new revelations, to understand what they meant for her, and for the decisions she had to make. In the dining room, Donna Dulce had prepared a simple but comforting dinner: hot soup, freshly baked bread, and a local fish stew with herbs. The room, illuminated mainly by candles due to the threat of a power outage, had an intimate atmosphere that contrasted with the storm raging outside. The last time I saw a storm like this was 5 years ago, commented Donna Dulce as she served the soup. The master was in London, and we had to evacuate the villa when the sea began to rise too much. Her words weren't particularly reassuring, but her calm tone suggested that she didn't consider the current situation so serious. Should we be worried? Asked Clara, looking toward the windows where the rain was beating hard. The villa is built on an elevated point, and the master has reinforced the defenses against the sea since then, Donna Dulce reassured her. We'll be fine, though perhaps without electricity for a while. As if her words had been prophetic, the lights flickered once more before going out completely, leaving only the glow of the candles and the occasional flash of lightning to illuminate the room. It seems we'll be dining by candlelight, commented Mateus, trying to lighten the atmosphere. Clara smiled weakly, remembering another candlelit dinner many years ago, when Mateus had proposed to her in a small restaurant in São Paulo. Life seemed determined to create echoes of the past these days. After Donna Dulce retired to her room in the service wing, Clara and Mateus were left alone in the dining room, surrounded by candles and with the constant sound of rain and wind as the only soundtrack. "What are you thinking about?" asked Mateus after a while of contemplative silence. Clara played with her wineglass, considering her response. "About how life sometimes seems to move in circles," she replied finally. "A few weeks ago, my biggest concern was getting to the Vienna competition on time. Now I'm stranded in a villa during a storm, with my ex-fiancé considering offers I never imagined, and discovering secrets about people I barely know." Mateus smiled at her description. "When you put it that way, it sounds like the plot of a Gothic novel," he joked. Clara couldn't help but laugh, the tension of the situation dissipating a bit. "All that's missing is the ghost of the tormented ancestor," she added, following the joke. "Oh, I'm sure this house has its own ghosts," replied Mateus, his tone becoming more serious. "We all do in one form or another." His words resonated with Clara, who thought of her own ghosts, the lost opportunities, the paths not taken, the words never said. "What are your ghosts, Mateus?" she asked softly, genuinely interested in his answer. He looked her in the eyes, the candlelight creating dancing shadows on his face. "You," he replied simply. "It's always been you, Clara. The biggest regret of my life was letting you go." The raw honesty of his response left her speechless for a moment. She had expected evasions, perhaps a joke to deflect the question, not this direct confession. 15 years have passed, Mateus," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. "We've both lived entire lives since then." "I know," he nodded, "and I don't expect time to be undone, or feelings to remain unchanged. I just want you to know that if you give me another chance, I won't make the same mistake twice." Clara felt a confused mixture of emotions, longing for what they once had, fear of being hurt again, and something else, a feeling she couldn't or didn't dare to name yet. "I need time," she said finally. "Everything is happening too quickly." Mateus nodded, respecting her response. "Time is the only thing we have tonight, it seems," he replied, pointing to the windows where the storm continued without signs of abating. Clara smiled at his attempt to lighten the moment. "What do we do now?" she asked, looking around the darkened room. "Well, we could check out João's library," suggested Mateus. "He has an impressive collection, including some rare volumes of music history that might interest you." The suggestion sounded perfectly innocent, but Clara remembered what Mateus had mentioned about João's private office and his collection of materials about her. "Show me," she decided impulsively, moved by a mixture of curiosity and perhaps a desire to better understand her enigmatic host. Mateus seemed surprised by her quick acceptance, but didn't object. Taking a candelabra, he guided Clara through the darkened corridors of the villa to a double door at the end of a hallway. "This is the main library," he explained as he opened the doors. "But the private office is behind that door," he added, pointing to a smaller entrance at the back of the room. The library was impressive even in the limited candlelight, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves full of volumes, comfortable reading armchairs, a large work table in the center. Everything exuded the air of a sanctuary of knowledge, carefully curated by someone with a passion for books. "Is it locked?" asked Clara, approaching the private office door. "Usually, yes," replied Mateus, following her. "But João doesn't expect visitors during the storm." To the surprise of both, when Mateus turned the knob, the door opened without resistance. "Should we?" hesitated Clara, suddenly aware that they were about to invade her host's privacy. Mateus seemed equally conflicted. "Perhaps it's not right," he admitted, "but if you want to understand who João Monteiro really is and what he wants from you, this might give you some answers." Curiosity finally overcame prudence. Clara nodded, and they both entered João's private office. The room was smaller than the main library, but equally impressive. A large dark wood desk dominated the space, flanked by more bookshelves and a cork panel on the wall that even in the limited light Clara could see was covered with notes, photos, and clippings. Mateus directed the candelabra toward the panel, illuminating its contents, and Clara held her breath at what she saw. There, carefully organized, were newspaper and magazine clippings spanning decades. Her first recital as a student, her brief European tour, her work at the São Paulo Conservatory. There were programs of concerts in which she had participated, photographs taken from a distance, handwritten notes that seemed to catalogue her public appearances. "My God," murmured Clara, approaching to better examine the panel. "This is disturbing," completed Mateus, his expression worried. "I didn't know it was so extensive when I first saw it." Clara studied the materials more closely. There was nothing explicitly threatening in the collection. In fact, it seemed more the work of a dedicated admirer or a meticulous biographer than a stalker. Still, the extent and thoroughness of the tracking was disconcerting. Her eyes stopped on an old photo that she didn't immediately recognize. It was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, playing a piano in what seemed to be a concert hall. The image was yellowed with time, but the similarity between the woman in the photo and Clara was striking. "This isn't me," she said, pointing to the image. Mateus came closer, holding the candelabra to see better. "No, it's not you," he agreed, frowning as he studied the photo. "But the resemblance is striking." Clara looked for some identification in the photograph and found a small handwritten note in the lower corner. "Isabel Santos, Rio de Janeiro Conservatory, 1970. "Isabel Santos," she read aloud, feeling a chill run down her spine. "It's my mother's name." Mateus looked at her with surprise. "Your mother? Are you sure?" Clara nodded, her mind working quickly to connect the pieces of the puzzle. "My mother studied in Rio before marrying my father," she explained, her voice tense with emotion. "She was a promising pianist, but abandoned her career when she became pregnant with me." Both remained silent for a moment, processing the implication of this discovery. "This goes beyond your piano lessons to João," murmured Mateus finally. "There's some connection between him and your family that he hasn't told us about." Clara nodded slowly, her gaze scanning the rest of the panel. Near her mother's photo, she found another image that left her breathless. A young man, perhaps in his 30s, standing next to a teenage João. The resemblance between the man and João was unmistakable. Same bearing, same penetrating green eyes. "It must be his father," deduced Clara, "the mayor of Rio." Mateus studied the photo and nodded. "Yes, I remember seeing photos of him in the festival archives. Antonio Monteiro, he was quite a controversial figure in local politics during the 70s and 80s. Clara was about to respond when her gaze caught something else, a yellowed newspaper clipping placed next to the photos. The headline, partially visible, said, "Scandal at the Conservatory. Prestigious director and talented student." The rest of the headline was hidden by another document, but it was enough for Clara to feel the ground sway beneath her feet. "My mother," she murmured, the pieces finally falling into place. "My mother and João's father." Before she could complete the thought, a noise in the main library startled them. Someone had entered. "Hello?" called Donna Dulce's voice. "Miss Clara? Mr. Mateus? Are you here?" Mateus reacted quickly, guiding Clara out of the private office and quietly closing the door behind them, just as Donna Dulce appeared with her own candle. "Ah, here you are," said the housekeeper, apparently suspecting nothing. "Mr. João just called on the emergency line. He managed to reach Santos before the roads closed completely. He wanted to make sure you were all right and had everything you needed to pass the night comfortably." "We're fine, thank you, Donna Dulce," replied Clara, trying to make her voice sound normal despite the commotion from what she had just discovered. "We were just looking for something to read during the storm." Donna Dulce nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. "There are more candles and additional blankets in the closet in the main hallway if you need them," she informed. "Good night." When Donna Dulce withdrew, Clara turned to Mateus, her mind still processing the implications of their discovery. "I need to know the truth," she said with determination, "the whole truth. And I think there's only one person who can provide it." Mateus nodded, understanding. "João," he confirmed, "but you'll have to wait until the storm abates and he returns." Clara looked toward the windows, where the rain continued falling relentlessly, like a curtain separating the present from the past. A past that she now knew was much more intertwined with her life than she could ever have imagined. "I'll wait," she said firmly. "I've waited all my life to understand why my mother gave up her dreams. I can wait one more day." Mateus took her hand, offering silent support as the candles cast dancing shadows on the ancient volumes of the library, silent witnesses to secrets that had remained hidden for decades. The storm subsided at dawn, leaving behind a surprisingly clear sky and clean air that smelled of wet earth and sea salt. Clara, who had barely slept, observed from her balcony how the rising sun illuminated the transformed landscape. Fallen trees, paths turned into small streams, and the beach covered with algae and debris, dragged by the enraged waves. The revelation of the previous night weighed on her mind, like a complex musical piece whose resolution she still couldn't discern. The images from João's office, especially the photograph of her mother and the enigmatic newspaper clipping, had occupied her thoughts during the long hours of darkness. A knock on the door interrupted her ruminations. "Come in," she said, expecting to see Mateus or Donna Dulce. To her surprise, it was João who entered, his face showing signs of fatigue but with a kind smile. "Good morning, Clara," he greeted. "I hope I'm not interrupting your rest. I've just returned from Santos and wanted to personally ensure that you were well after the storm." Clara studied him with new eyes, looking in his features for some indication of what she now suspected. How much of his father was in him? How much did he really know about the connection between their families? "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, deciding not to immediately reveal what she had discovered. "The villa withstood admirably. It was built to withstand the elements," commented João, approaching the balcony to contemplate the damage in the garden. "Although it seems we'll have quite a bit of restoration work in the coming days." Clara nodded distractedly, her mind formulating the best way to address the questions burning inside her. "João," she finally began, opting for a direct approach, "why did you really bring me here? And please, this time I want the complete truth." He turned to her, his expression becoming serious. For a moment he seemed to consider some evasive response, but something in Clara's determination seemed to dissuade him. "You deserve to know everything," he finally admitted, "but it's a long and complicated story. How about we talk after breakfast? There's a place on the property I'd like to show you, a place that might have more answers than I myself can offer." Clara considered his proposal. Part of her wanted to insist on immediate answers, but another part recognized that some truths required the appropriate context. "All right," she finally accepted, "but no more evasions, João. I've lived too long in the shadow of family secrets I didn't even know." An expression of surprise briefly crossed his face, as if he hadn't expected her to already have some idea of what he was going to reveal. "You have my word," he promised solemnly. "I'll wait for you in the dining room in half an hour." When João withdrew, Clara prepared mechanically for the day, her mind still revolving around the possibilities. During breakfast, the conversation stayed on superficial topics: the storm damage, the state of the roads, the approaching festival. Mateus, who had joined them, occasionally glanced at Clara, clearly aware of the underlying tension. After breakfast, João guided her through a path that descended the hillside, moving away from the main villa and approaching a more wooded area of the property. The path, partially cleared by the staff who had begun cleaning tasks at dawn, still showed the ravages of the storm. "Few visitors know this part of the property," commented João as they advanced. "It's a personal place." Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, they arrived at a small clearing where a structure that Clara didn't expect rose, a stone cabin, small but elegant, with a covered terrace that offered views of the sea in the distance. "What is this place?" asked Clara, intrigued by the contrast between the opulence of the main villa and the rustic but refined simplicity of this construction. "My refuge," replied João with a melancholic smile. "When I need to escape from responsibilities, from expectations, even from myself, I come here." He opened the door and indicated that she should enter. The interior was surprisingly cozy. A main room with a fireplace, bookshelves full of books, a small desk next to a window, and what most caught Clara's attention, an old but well-preserved upright piano in a corner. "It belonged to my mother," explained João, noticing her interest in the instrument. "I brought it here when I bought this property. It's one of the few personal objects I keep from my childhood." Clara approached the piano, passing her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, feeling the connection to the past that this simple act represented. "Your mother also played," she commented, not as a question but as a confirmation. "Yes," replied João, approaching the desk. "Though not professionally. For her it was a private passion, something she did for pure pleasure." He opened a drawer in the desk and extracted a carved wooden box about the size of a large book. He placed it on the surface and opened it carefully. "Letters," he explained, inviting Clara to approach. "My mother kept them for years and gave them to me shortly before she died. I think she hoped that someday I would find the courage to act according to their content." Clara looked inside the box and saw a set of yellowed envelopes, some with evident signs of having been read many times. "Whose letters are these?" she asked, though something inside her already anticipated the answer. "Some are from my father to my mother," replied João. "Others are from my mother to a close friend in whom she confided. And others," he made a significant pause, "are from Isabel Santos." Clara felt the air leave her lungs at the confirmation of her suspicions. "My mother," she murmured. "Yes," confirmed João, his voice soft but firm. "Your mother and my father met at the Rio de Janeiro Conservatory in 1970. He was the director, a married man with influential political connections. She was a brilliant student, with a promising future as a concert pianist." Clara took a seat in a nearby chair, preparing herself for what would come. "They fell in love," continued João, taking one of the letters from the box. "A forbidden, secret love, but according to these letters, genuinely profound. My father was trapped in an unhappy marriage with my mother, maintained by social convenience and political ambitions." "But my mother met my father, they got married," objected Clara, trying to reconcile this new narrative with the little she knew about her mother's youth. "After the scandal," explained João, selecting another letter. "When the relationship between your mother and my father was discovered, there were consequences. The conservatory threatened to expel her. My father's political career was at stake. To protect both, they decided to separate. Your mother met your father shortly after, a good man who accepted her with her broken heart and all." Clara processed this information, fragments of family conversations acquiring new meaning, her mother's silence about her time in Rio, her melancholy when listening to certain pieces, her insistence that Clara never sacrifice her talent for anyone. "My father never forgot her," continued João. "Even after his political career took off, even after his marriage to my mother finally dissolved, he continued thinking about Isabel, wondering what had become of her, of the future they could have had." João approached the piano and softly played a few notes, a simple but emotional melody that Clara didn't recognize. "My father composed this for her," he explained. "He was never a trained musician, but he had a natural ear. This little piece was his way of keeping her memory alive." Clara felt an unexpected emotion at this revelation, a connection with a facet of her mother that she had never known. "Did my mother know?" she asked. "Did she know that your father continued thinking about her?" João shook his head. "I don't think so. Their paths never crossed again, at least not directly. But there's something else you should know, Clara." He approached the desk again and took out a different envelope, more recent than the others. "When my father was dying 5 years ago, He confessed the whole story to me. He told me about Isabel, about her love for music, about how he saw in you through the clippings and news he followed, the realization of the talent your mother had sacrificed. Clara felt tears accumulating in her eyes, but held them back, determined to hear the entire story. My father made me promise something, continued João. He asked me to find a way to honor that connection, to settle a debt he felt he had with your family. He told me about how the scandal had altered the course of your mother's life, robbing her of opportunities, pushing her toward an existence different from the one she had dreamed of. That's why you bought the conservatory, deduced Clara, the pieces finally fitting together. That's why you want me to direct it. João nodded, a slight smile of admiration on his face. You were always perceptive, he commented. Yes, in part. I wanted to create an opportunity that would close the circle in some way. The Villa Lobos Conservatory was where your mother gave her first recitals as a student. Now it could be where her daughter leaves her legacy as a director. Clara stood up, needing to move to process all these revelations. She approached the window, observing the sea in the distance, brilliant under the morning sun. And Mateus? She asked suddenly. Is he also part of your plan? João seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Not initially, he admitted. I hired Mateus for his talent and vision for the festival long before I decided to contact you. It was a coincidence to discover his connection to you, though I acknowledge that I took advantage of it when I learned of it. Does he know about all this? Insisted Clara, needing to understand to what extent she had been manipulated. No, replied João firmly. Mateus knows I have a special interest in you, but he doesn't know the complete story or the promise to my father. That's a truth that only you deserve to hear first. Clara sat down again, feeling the weight of decades of secrets and hidden connections. There's something else you should see, said João, extracting a final letter from the box. This arrived 10 years ago, shortly after your parents passed away. He handed the envelope to Clara, who immediately recognized her mother's elegant and fluid handwriting. With slightly trembling hands, she extracted the letter and began to read. Dear Antonio, began the missive, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer in this world. I have kept silent for decades, respecting the lives we both built separately. But there are truths that deserve to be known, even if they arrive late. Clara read in silence, the tears finally overflowing as her mother's words revealed a life of silenced love, of postponed but never forgotten dreams, and of an ardent desire that her daughter never face the same dilemma between love and music. Upon reaching the end, a phrase especially caught her attention. Clara carries music in her blood as I never did, with a purity that transcends technique. Protect that gift, Antonio, if your paths ever cross. It's the only thing I would ask of you after so many years. Clara folded the letter slowly, trying to reconcile this new version of her mother with the one she had known, the practical and dedicated woman who had prioritized her family above any personal ambition. Why do you show me all this now? She finally asked, looking at João directly. He held her gaze without evasion this time. Because you need to know the whole truth to make your decisions, he replied. The offer of the conservatory, the festival, even your stay here. It all began as an attempt to fulfill a promise to settle a family debt. But it has become something more. What do you mean? Asked Clara, noticing a change in his tone. Getting to know you these weeks, seeing your talent, your dedication, your internal struggle between responsibility and passion, has made me realize that you deserve more than being part of an old debt, explained João. You deserve to choose your own path with full knowledge of the past, but without feeling obligated by it. Clara reflected on his words, surprised by the sincerity she perceived in them. And if I choose to leave? She asked. If I decide I don't want to be part of this intertwined family history, then I'll wish you the best and move on, replied João simply. The opportunities I've offered you are genuine, Clara. The conservatory needs someone with your vision. The festival would be richer with your participation. But the decision must be yours based on what you desire for your future, not on what others desired in the past. Clara rose again, approaching the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys and softly played the melody that João had interpreted before, the piece his father had composed for her mother. It's beautiful, she commented. Simple, but deeply emotional. Like the best loves, replied João softly. Clara continued playing, improvising slightly, adding her own interpretation to the original melody. It was a symbolic act, a way to connect with that newly discovered past, while simultaneously transforming it into something of her own. "I need time," she said finally, "to process all this, to decide what it means for me and for my future." "Of course," accepted João. "Take all the time you need. The cabin is yours if you desire privacy. The letters, too, they belong more to your family than to mine now." Clara nodded, grateful for this space to reflect. "There's one last thing you should know," added João, heading toward the door. "Your sister called early this morning. It seems there's been some kind of misunderstanding with the bank. The late mortgage payments have been covered anonymously. The apartment is no longer at risk." Clara looked at him with surprise. "Was it you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. João smiled slightly. "Consider it a small payment of a very old debt," he replied. "Or simply the action of someone who values the musical legacy of 2 generations of extraordinary women." With these words, he withdrew, leaving Clara alone with the letters, the piano, and the echo of revelations that had fundamentally altered her understanding of her own history. Outside, the sea continued its eternal dialogue with the coast, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding on its shores. Clara sat down at the piano again and began to play, not the music she had meticulously practiced for years, but a free improvisation, a spontaneous expression of the complex emotions now flowing through her. In that moment, in that small cabin surrounded by the vestiges of the storm, Clara felt as if she were playing not just for herself, but also for her mother, for all the lives and decisions that had converged to bring her to this precise moment of clarity and possibility. The following days passed in a kind of emotional limbo for Clara. She had opted to stay in the cabin, needing space and solitude to process everything she had discovered. João had respected her decision, sending Dona Dulce with meals and basic necessities, but keeping himself discreetly absent. Mateus had also maintained his distance, though Clara knew from the occasional notes he left with Dona Dulce that he was concerned about her. The cabin had become a refuge where Clara spent hours reading and rereading the letters, playing the old piano, and contemplating the sea from the terrace. Sometimes she cried, not so much from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of discovering a completely new dimension of her own family history. The relationship between her mother and Antonio Montero had been deeper and more significant than she could ever have imagined. The letters revealed an Isabel Santos very different from the mother Clara had known, passionate, ambitious, full of artistic dreams. Reading her words was like meeting a stranger who, paradoxically, seemed profoundly familiar. On the 4th day of her retreat, Clara was playing the piano when she heard a soft knock on the door. Expecting to find Dona Dulce with lunch, she was surprised to open it and see Helena. "Helena!" she exclaimed, momentarily disconcerted. "What are you doing here?" Her sister, looking tired but determined, was holding a small suitcase. "You weren't answering my calls," she replied, entering without waiting for an invitation. "And after what happened with the mortgage, I was worried." Clara closed the door, trying to organize her thoughts. She hadn't anticipated this encounter and wasn't sure if she was prepared to share everything she had discovered. "How did you find me?" she asked. "It wasn't difficult," replied Helena, observing the cabin with curiosity. "I called the villa, and a man named Mateus explained where you were. He seems worried about you, by the way." Clara nodded distractedly, trying to decide how to proceed. "Helena, there's a lot you don't know, that you don't understand about why I'm here." "Like the fact that someone anonymously paid our mortgage," interrupted Helena, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Or like the fact that you've completely abandoned the Vienna competition to stay at the property of a millionaire you barely know." "It's not that simple," began Clara, but Helena raised a hand to stop her. "Before you try to explain, I think you should see this," she said, taking a crumpled envelope from her bag. "I found it 2 days ago, while looking for the mortgage documents in Mom's office." Clara took the envelope cautiously. It was open and contained what appeared to be an old newspaper clipping and a photograph. "What is this?" she asked, though a premonition told her she already knew the answer. "Read it yourself," replied Helena, sitting in one of the armchairs by the window. Clara extracted the clipping and immediately recognized the headline she had glimpsed partially in João's office. "Scandal at the Conservatory. prestigious director and talented student abandoned their posts in mysterious circumstances. The article, dated 1971, vaguely detailed how Antonio Montero, director of the Rio Conservatory and rising prominent politician, had suddenly resigned for personal reasons. Simultaneously, a promising pianist, Isabel Santos, had abandoned her studies. Shortly before an important recital, the photograph that accompanied the clipping showed her mother, young and radiant, next to a man that Clara could now clearly identify as João's father. They were at what seemed to be a formal event at the conservatory, maintaining a professional distance between them, but even in the yellowed image, Clara could perceive the underlying tension and attraction. "Did you know?" asked Helena softly. "Did you know about Mom and this man?" Clara raised her gaze, debating whether to protect her sister from potentially painful truths or to share the burden of knowledge. "I discovered it a few days ago," she finally admitted. "João is the son of Antonio Montero. He brought me here because—" She stopped, unsure of how to explain the complex web of emotional debts, promises, and coincidences that had converged to bring her to Villa Harmonica. "Because he felt a debt to our family," she completed, opting for simplification. Helena processed this information in silence for a few moments. "Do you think Mom loved this man?" she finally asked, her voice small, almost childlike. Clara thought about the letters she had read, about the passionate words written in her mother's elegant handwriting. "Yes," she replied honestly. "I think she loved him deeply. But she also loved Dad, Helena. In a different way, perhaps, but equally real." Helena nodded slowly as if assimilating a difficult but necessary truth. "That explains a lot," she said after a moment. "Her melancholy when she played certain pieces, her insistence that you never abandon music, and her determination that you find your own path, free from family expectations," added Clara, now clearly seeing how her mother had tried, in her own way, to ensure that her daughters didn't repeat her own sacrifices. The sisters sat in silence, united by this new understanding of the woman who had raised them. "What will you do now?" finally asked Helena. "Will you accept the conservatory offer?" Clara was surprised that her sister knew that detail. "How do you know about that?" "Mateus told me," explained Helena. "We talked quite a bit while he was explaining how to get here." Clara felt a pang of irritation at the apparent ease with which Helena and Mateus had established communication, but she quickly dismissed it, recognizing it as a vestige of old, irrational jealousy. "I haven't decided yet," she replied honestly. "It's an extraordinary opportunity, but there are many considerations." "Like what?" pressed Helena. "The apartment? It's no longer a problem. My situation." "I'll find work, Clara. I always manage." Clara studied her sister, noticing for the first time in a long time a determination in her eyes that she hadn't seen before. "It's not just that," explained Clara. "It's— my entire life has been structured around certain expectations, certain responsibilities. The idea of changing everything so drastically—" "Scares you?" completed Helena softly. Clara nodded, grateful for her sister's understanding. "Ironically, that's exactly what Mom wanted to prevent," commented Helena. "That fear would prevent you from following your dreams." Clara smiled sadly at the observation. "I guess I'm more like her than I thought," she murmured. Helena approached and took her sister's hands in hers, an unusually protective gesture coming from the younger one. "The difference is that you can still choose, Clara," she said with intensity. "You can still decide what story you want to write." Helena's words resonated deeply with Clara, as if she had articulated the exact truth that Clara needed to hear. "And what about Mateus?" asked Helena, slightly changing the subject. "He seems to still feel something for you." Clara sighed, the topic of Mateus adding another layer of complexity to her decisions. "It's complicated," she replied. 15 years have passed, we're different people now." "But some things don't change," observed Helena. "The way he talks about you, it's evident that he never really forgot you." Clara remembered her recent conversations with Mateus, the raw honesty of his confessions, the connection that seemed to have survived the years and disappointments. "I need to be sure that any decision I make regarding Mateus is for the right reasons," she explained. "Not out of nostalgia, not out of fear of loneliness, but because I truly believe in a future together." Helena nodded, understanding. "You know," she said after a moment, "for years I slightly resented you." Me? Asked Clara, surprised. Why? For being so perfect, explained Helena with a sad smile. Always responsible, always doing the right thing. The daughter who sacrificed everything for the family, while I was the problematic one, the one who constantly needed to be taken care of. Clara looked at her with surprise. She had never considered that her sense of responsibility could have been perceived that way by her sister. I'm not perfect, Helena, she said softly. I just did what I believed I should do. I know, nodded Helena. But now, it's your turn to do what you want to do. It's your turn to be a little selfish, to think of your happiness first. Her words seemed to release something within Clara, as if she had been waiting for a permission she never believed she needed. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. It was Matthias with a concerned and relieved expression at the same time upon seeing the two sisters together. Sorry for the intrusion, he apologized. I just wanted to make sure you had found the way without problems. Helena gave him a complicit smile. Everything's perfect, she replied, rising. In fact, I think I'll go back to the villa to rest a bit from the trip. You two probably have a lot to talk about. Before Clara could protest, Helena had collected her bag and left, leaving her alone with Matthias. Your sister is direct, he commented with a small smile. She always has been, agreed Clara, indicating that he should sit. Matthias, there's something I need to ask you. He nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Did you know about my mother and Joaum's father? Asked Clara directly. Matthias shook his head. Not until recently, he admitted. I found some photographs in Joaum's office, but I didn't know the whole story. He only told me he had a family connection with you that he hoped to resolve. Clara nodded, believing in his sincerity. One last question, she said, looking at him directly. If I decided to accept the direction of the conservatory, if I decided to stay, what would that mean for us? Matthias looked at her with an intensity that made Clara's heart slightly accelerate. It would mean a second chance, he replied simply. One that I wouldn't waste this time. Clara felt something resolve within her, like a dissonance that finally finds its resolution. I need to talk to Joaum, she said, rising with new determination. I think I've made my decision. Matthias nodded, offering her his hand. She took it, and together they left the cabin toward a future that, for the first time in a long time, Clara was eager to discover. The main villa was bustling with activity when Clara and Matthias returned. The staff was running from one side to the other, transporting decorations, arranging flowers, and organizing furniture. What's happening? Asked Clara, disconcerted by the sudden display of activity. The inaugural reception of the festival, explained Matthias. It's tonight, here at the villa. With the storm and everything else, I forgot to mention it. Clara felt momentarily disoriented. She had spent days immersed in revelations about her family past, almost forgetting the outside world that continued its inexorable course. They found Joaum on the main terrace, supervising the installation of a small stage where, presumably, there would be performances during the night. Clara, he greeted her with evident surprise. I wasn't expecting you so soon. Is everything all right? Perfectly, she replied with a new confidence. Could we talk in private? Joaum nodded, guiding her to his office, the same where days ago Clara had discovered the first clues about the connection between their families. I've made a decision, announced Clara once they were alone. I'll accept the direction of the conservatory. Joaum's expression lit up with genuine satisfaction. That's excellent news, he said. The conservatory will flourish under your direction. But I have conditions, continued Clara firmly. Of course, nodded Joaum. I'm listening. I want total autonomy over the educational program, began Clara, and I want to establish a scholarship fund for students from disadvantaged backgrounds in memory of my mother. Joaum smiled, clearly pleased with her terms. Granted without reservations, he agreed. Anything else? Clara looked at him directly, with a determination that surprised even herself. Yes. I want the truth about the payment of our mortgage. Joaum held her gaze without wavering. It was an act of justice, not charity, he explained. Your mother gave up valuable opportunities due to her relationship with my father. That debt was never really settled. Clara nodded, accepting his explanation. One last thing, she added. Tonight at the reception, I'll play the piece that your father composed for my mother. I think it's time that music is heard. Emotion briefly crossed Joaum's usually controlled face. It would be an honor, he said with a slightly hoarse voice. As Clara withdrew to prepare for the night, a sensation of peace enveloped her. For the first time in years, she felt she was making decisions based on her desires, not just on her responsibilities. The reception was larger than Clara had anticipated. The cultural and artistic elite of the coast had gathered at Villa Harmonica, creating an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Clara observed from a corner, wearing a simple black dress that Helena had insisted on buying during a quick excursion to the nearby village. "You look beautiful," said a voice behind her. It was Larissa, her friend from São Paulo, elegantly dressed and with an expression of amazement as she contemplated the villa. "Larissa!" exclaimed Clara, hugging her with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Helena called me," explained her friend. "She said it was important that I come, though she didn't mention that the party would be in a villa worthy of a movie." Clara smiled, moved by her sister's gesture. Having Larissa there, a connection to her life in São Paulo, made her decision to change feel less abrupt. "There's so much to tell you," began Clara, but she was interrupted by Mateus, who was approaching with a man of distinguished appearance. "Clara, I want to introduce you to Eduardo Vieira, music critic from O Estado de São Paulo," said Mateus. "He has come especially for the festival." Clara shook the critic's hand, surprised by the level of connections that Mateus had established for the event. "Mr. Montero has told me that perhaps you would delight us with a performance tonight," commented Vieira. "It would be an honor to hear you." Clara nodded, feeling a nervousness she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the critic's presence, it was the personal significance of the piece she had chosen to interpret. When she finally sat at the grand piano on the improvised stage, the murmur of conversations gradually died down. Clara saw Helena and Larissa in the front row, Mateus observing her with pride from one side, and João further back with an expression of contained expectation. "Tonight I will perform a very special piece," announced Clara. "A composition that has never been performed in public, created by someone who deeply loved music, though he was never a professional musician." Without further preamble, her fingers began to glide over the keys, interpreting the simple but emotional melody that Antonio Montero had composed for Isabel Santos. But Clara had done something more. She had developed the melody, expanding it into a complete piece that respected the original theme but elevated it to something new, a conversation between past and present, between what could have been and what might be. When she played the final chords, a harmonic resolution that suggested not an end but a new beginning, there was a moment of absolute silence before an ovation erupted that seemed to shake the ancient stones of the hall. The audience rose spontaneously, applauding with an enthusiasm that transcended the usual courtesy of classical concerts. Clara raised her gaze and saw first Helena and Larissa in the front row, both with tears in their eyes and radiant smiles. Then João, nodding with deep approval and something that seemed like paternal pride. And finally Mateus, who had come up to the stage to join her in the acknowledgements, his face reflecting a mixture of professional admiration and personal love that made Clara's heart skip a beat. The applause continued, forcing her to return for several additional bows. When they finally withdrew backstage, Clara was immediately surrounded by musicians, critics, and personalities who wanted to congratulate her. Among the whirlwind of congratulations and conversations, João managed to approach her. "Isabel would be proud," he said simply, his usual composure slightly altered by emotion. "You've honored her memory in the most beautiful way possible." Clara nodded, touching the necklace at her throat, feeling a connection with her mother that transcended time and circumstances. "Thank you for making this possible," she replied, "for bringing me here, for revealing the truth, for giving me the opportunity to rediscover my own path." The celebration continued in the villa, where a reception had been prepared for the artists and special guests. Clara, normally reserved in these social events, was surprised to find herself enjoying the moment, accepting congratulations and discussing her composition with other musicians. It was almost midnight when she managed to briefly escape to the garden for a moment of solitude. The night was perfect, with a starry sky and the distant sound of waves as the only accompaniment. "Here you are," said Mateus's voice behind her. "I've been looking for you." Clara turned, smiling as she saw him approach. "I needed a moment to process everything," she explained. "It's been a transformative night." Mateus nodded, positioning himself beside her to contemplate the sea. "It has been," he agreed. "And this is just the beginning, Clara. The doors that have opened for you tonight, it's the kind of opportunity musicians dream of their entire lives." Clara reflected on his words, conscious of the truth in them. Vieira's article, the invitation he had mentioned for a series of concerts with the São Paulo Symphony Orchestra, the success of her composition, they were the kind of professional validation she had desired for years. "It's strange," she commented after a moment. "For so long my life was defined by responsibilities, by doing the right thing for everyone except myself. And now suddenly I have more options than I ever thought possible." Mateus looked at her with intensity, the moonlight reflecting in his eyes. "And which option makes you happy?" he asked softly. Clara considered the question, not as a formality, but as a true reflection on what she desired for her future. "The conservatory," she replied finally. "The opportunity to influence the next generation of musicians, to create a space where talent and passion are equally valued, and also composition, which I never thought was a path for me, but now feels as natural as breathing." "And us?" asked Mateus, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "Is there room for an us in that future?" Clara turned to him, seeing not the ambitious young man who had left her 15 years ago, but the mature man who had learned from his mistakes and grown through them. "I believe," she said slowly, "that any future worth living has to include love. Not the kind of love that demands sacrifices or that competes with our dreams, but the one that enriches them, expands them, makes them possible." Mateus took her hands in his, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting in these weeks. "It's the only kind of love I want to offer you," he said simply, "a love that celebrates your music, your independence, your decisions. A love that grows with you, not despite you." Clara felt the last barriers in her heart dissolving before the sincerity of his words. They had traveled a long road, separated and together, to reach this point of mutual understanding. "Then yes," she replied, her voice firm and clear like the notes of a perfectly executed composition. "There is room for an us in my future. A different us than what we almost had before. Stronger, perhaps, certainly wiser." Mateus smiled, and in that smile Clara saw the reflection of all the possibilities that now extended before them. Rio, the conservatory, their respective careers flourishing in parallel, a shared life that didn't demand the diminishment of either for the other's shine. From the villa, the notes of a piano floated to them, some inspired guest performing an improvised piece. The melody, carried by the sea breeze, seemed the perfect accompaniment for this moment of decision and promise. With a synchronization that seemed choreographed by destiny itself, Mateus leaned toward her as Clara rose slightly, their lips meeting in a kiss that sealed not only their personal reconnection, but also the conscious choice of a shared future. When they separated, Clara looked at the illuminated villa and then at the dark and vast sea, symbols of security and adventure, of the known and the unexplored. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel that she had to choose between both worlds. She could have both on her own terms. "I think it's time to return to the party," she finally said. "There are many people waiting to talk to you about the success of the festival." Mateus nodded, offering her his arm with a gesture that combined chivalry and companionship. "And with you, about your extraordinary composition," he added. "This is your moment, Clara, the moment you always deserved." As they walked back to the villa, Clara felt a serene certainty settle within her. The decisions she had made, accepting the direction of the conservatory, exploring her talent as a composer, giving a second chance to love with Mateus, weren't choices between mutually exclusive options, but steps toward an integrated life where all facets of herself could finally coexist and flourish. The path wouldn't always be easy, she knew. There would be challenges in Rio, adjustments in her relationship with Mateus, moments of doubt, and perhaps even passing regret. But for the first time, she felt equipped to face them not as necessary sacrifices, but as natural parts of a life lived fully, with purpose and passion. And as the lights of the villa grew brighter as they approached, Clara knew she had made her choice. She had chosen, finally and without reservations, her own music. 6 months later, Clara contemplated Rio de Janeiro from the window of her new office at the Villa Lobos Conservatory. Autumn had arrived in the city, painting the trees in Parque Lage in golden and reddish tones. On her piano stand rested the score of her second composition, still in process, inspired by the sounds and rhythms of her new city. The transition from São Paulo had been more fluid than expected. Helena had decided to stay in the family apartment, now with a stable job as an assistant in an art gallery. The weekly calls between the sisters had become a tradition. Their relationship transformed into one of equality and mutual respect instead of the caregiver-dependent dynamic that had characterized so many years of their interaction. The conservatory, under Clara's direction, was flourishing. Her innovative approach, which combined rigorous classical training with spaces for personal expression and experimentation, had attracted talented students from all over Brazil and beyond. The scholarship program established in memory of Isabel Santos had allowed young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to access quality musical education, something that filled Clara with particular pride. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning from the window. It was Anna, a young pianist of 12, one of the first beneficiaries of the Isabel Santos scholarship. With exceptional talent but extremely shy, she reminded Clara of a certain student from Rio 30 years ago. "Sorry, Director," said the girl with an almost inaudible voice. "I wanted to show you something." Clara smiled, indicating that she should approach the piano. "Of course, Anna, and remember, when we're alone you can call me Clara." The girl nodded, sitting nervously at the piano. She breathed deeply as Clara had taught her and began to play. It wasn't a piece from the standard repertoire they studied, but an original melody, simple but surprisingly emotional for someone so young. "It's beautiful," commented Clara when she finished. "Did you compose it?" Anna nodded, a slight blush tinging her cheeks. "I was inspired by what you told us in class about finding our own voice," she explained. "I don't know if it's good, but—" "It's authentic," Clara gently interrupted. "And that's more important than technical perfection. Technique can be taught, Anna. Authenticity must come from within." The girl's shy but radiant smile was all the reward Clara needed, a tangible reminder of why she had chosen this path. After the improvised lesson with Anna, Clara collected her things and prepared to leave. That night, the São Paulo Symphony Orchestra would premiere Echoes in a version orchestrated especially for the occasion. It would be the first time her composition would be performed with a full orchestra, a professional milestone that still filled her with wonder and nervous anticipation. Upon leaving the main building of the conservatory, she saw Mateus waiting for her by his car. They lived together now, in a spacious apartment in Copacabana, with enough room for 2 pianos and a terrace where they enjoyed long conversations at dusk. "Ready for the big night?" he asked, kissing her softly. As ready as one can be when delivering their creation to 70 musicians and a conductor, who definitely have their own ideas about how it should sound, joked Clara, though the underlying anxiety was real. Mateus laughed, opening the car door for her. "Alexandra is excellent," he reassured her, referring to the conductor of the symphony. "He respects your vision and only wants to amplify it with the orchestra's resources." The journey to the theatre where the concert would be held was quiet, both absorbed in their thoughts. Mateus's career had also prospered in these months. The success of the festival had led to more opportunities as an artistic director, and he was currently developing a series of educational concerts that combined classical music with interdisciplinary elements, a project that perfectly complemented Clara's educational vision at the conservatory. When they arrived, the lobby was already bustling with activity. Clara was immediately approached by several musicians from the orchestra, eager to discuss last-minute details about the interpretation. Mateus observed her with pride from a distance, giving her the professional space they had both learned to respect in their relationship. Among the crowd, Clara distinguished several familiar faces. Larissa, who had traveled from São Paulo especially for the concert, Eduardo Vieira, whose article had been only the first of several that positioned Clara as an innovative voice in the Brazilian musical panorama, and even her old mentor from the São Paulo Conservatory, who seemed to have made peace with the direction his former student's career had taken. But the presence that most moved her was that of João Monteiro, discreetly located in a corner of the lobby, observing everything with his usual enigmatic expression. Clara excused herself from the musicians and approached him. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said with genuine pleasure. "I thought you were in New York on business." João smiled, That smile she now recognized as a trait inherited from his father. And miss the orchestral premiere of Echoes? Impossible, he replied. Some business can wait. Music, when it's true, demands to be heard at the right time. Clara nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of his words. In the months that had passed, her relationship with João had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and a shared history that, though complex, no longer weighed as a secret, but enriched her understanding of the past. "Have you received news from Helena?" asked João, who had maintained a discreet but constant interest in the well-being of both sisters. "She's thriving," confirmed Clara. "The gallery has offered her a permanent position, and she's considering taking some art classes. It seems she has finally found her own path." "I'm glad to hear that," said João with sincerity. "Isabel would be proud of both of you." The mention of her mother, far from provoking sadness, now brought a sensation of continuity, of invisible threads connecting generations through time. "I must go to my seat," excused João, "but I wanted to give you this before." He handed her a small package wrapped in simple paper. "What is it?" asked Clara, intrigued. "Open it later," he suggested. "Perhaps tonight, when everything is over." With these enigmatic words so characteristic of him, João said goodbye, disappearing into the crowd that was beginning to head toward the main hall. There was no time to consider the mysterious gift. Clara was quickly summoned for a final consultation with the conductor before the concert. As the guest composer, she would have a special seat from where she could observe the interpretation of her work. The concert began punctually. The first part consisted of classic pieces from the Brazilian repertoire, interpreted with the technical and emotional excellence that had converted the São Paulo State Symphony Orchestra into one of the most respected orchestras in Latin America. During the intermission, Clara remained in her seat, too nervous to socialize. Mateus approached briefly, offering a comforting pressure on her shoulder before returning to his own seat, instinctively understanding that she needed these moments of solitude to center herself. When the second part began, Clara felt time slow down. The conductor ascended the podium and, after a brief introduction where he praised her as one of the most authentic and renewing voices of contemporary Brazilian music, gave the signal for her piece to begin. The first measures of Echoes, now transformed by the rich timbre of the full orchestra, floated in the hall with a beauty that almost hurt. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself to completely immerse in the experience of hearing her creation interpreted by such a talented ensemble. The central melody, the one Antonio Monteiro had composed for Isabel Santos and that Clara had developed and transformed, emerged clear and emotional from the strings, establishing the theme that would be explored and reinterpreted throughout the piece in a dialogue between tradition and innovation, past and present. When the last note faded into the silence of the hall, there was a moment of absolute stillness before an ovation erupted that seemed to shake the foundations of the theatre. The audience spontaneously rose to their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The conductor indicated that Clara should come up to the stage to receive the recognition. As she did so, she felt an indescribable mixture of gratitude, validation, and humility. From this new angle, she could see her loved ones in the audience. Mateus applauding with uncontained pride, Larissa and Helena embraced with tears in their eyes, João nodding with solemn satisfaction. It was, she understood in that moment, the culmination of a journey that had begun that afternoon at the airport, when she missed her flight to Vienna and an enigmatic man offered her a different ticket. Or perhaps it had begun much earlier, in a relationship between two young people in Rio, a love that, though truncated by circumstances, had left echoes that would resonate through generations. After the concert, there was a reception for the musicians and special guests. Clara, normally reserved at these events, found herself enjoying the conversations, the sincere compliments, the sense of belonging to this artistic community that now welcomed her not only as a performer, but as a creator. When she finally arrived home, past midnight, Mateus left her alone for a few moments, understanding she needed to process the emotional intensity of the night. Seated on the sofa in her living room, with the lights of Rio shining through the window, Clara remembered the small package that João had given her. She had put it in her purse, forgetting it in the excitement of the concert. She unwrapped it carefully to find a small antique box. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, rested a silver brooch with inlays of small amber-colored stones, forming the design of a treble clef. A folded piece of paper accompanied the jewel. On it, in Joan's elegant handwriting, was written, "This brooch belonged to my mother, who received it from hers. A family tradition that should have passed to a daughter I never had. It seems appropriate that it should now be yours, a symbol of how family destinies, though separated, can intertwine again through music and time. With admiration and affection, Joan." Clara held the brooch in her palm, feeling its historical and symbolic weight. It wasn't just a jewel. It was a recognition of the circles that life sometimes draws, of how the past and present can dialogue in harmony instead of opposition. Mateus returned to the living room with 2 glasses of wine, sitting beside her. "What's that?" he asked, noticing the brooch and the note. Clara explained Joan's gift, the family tradition it represented. "It's beautiful," commented Mateus, examining the delicate piece. "Their legacy transformed into something new. Like everything that has happened in these months," reflected Clara. "Like us." Mateus smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Do you know what I was thinking while listening to your composition tonight?" he asked. Clara shook her head, curious. "I was thinking about how some encounters, some relationships, are like perfect chords," he explained. "They don't work by coincidence, but by an internal musical logic, a natural harmony that perhaps we don't recognize immediately, but that, with time, reveals its inevitable perfection." Clara smiled at the musical metaphor, so characteristic of their way of communicating. "And us?" she asked softly. "Are we a perfect chord or a productive dissonance?" Mateus considered the question with seriousness. "I think we're both," he finally replied. "The stability of the perfect chord that gives us an emotional home, and the creative tension of dissonance that pushes us to grow, to explore, to not conform to the known." Clara nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. Their relationship, like her music, no longer sought sterile perfection but living authenticity, with all its complexities and contradictions. She rose and went to the piano that occupied a central place in their living room. With the brooch still in her hand, she began to play softly. Not echoes, not some known piece from the classical repertoire, but a free improvisation, a spontaneous expression of the present moment. Mateus approached, sitting beside her on the piano bench, not to play but to be present, to accompany her musical exploration with his physical proximity. As her fingers danced over the keys, Clara felt that all the pieces of her life, her past in São Paulo, the discovery of her mother's history, her new beginning in Rio, her renewed relationship with Mateus, her flourishing career as director and composer, were finally integrating into a coherent though complex composition. It wasn't a final resolution, she understood. It was a movement within a wider symphony that would continue developing, transforming, surprising her with new modulations and unexpected progressions. And as the music flowed from her hands, filling the apartment with melodies still unnamed, Clara knew with absolute certainty that at last she was interpreting the score she had always been destined to play, her own. The day of the premiere of her new composition dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that brought the scent of the sea to Clara and Mateus's apartment. Roots, as she had titled her second work, was a more ambitious and personal composition than Echoes. Inspired by Brazilian musical traditions and her own family roots, the piece would be presented at the Municipal Theatre of Rio as part of the Contemporary Music Festival program. Clara awoke early, after a restless night in which dreams and reality had mixed in a symphony of images and emotions. The score, finally completed after months of intensive work, seemed almost a living entity, a creature that had been born from her hands but would now follow its own path in the world. While preparing coffee in the kitchen, Mateus embraced her from behind in an affectionate hug. "Nervous?" he asked, depositing a soft kiss on her neck. "Strangely no," replied Clara, turning to face him. "I feel more curious, as if I were presenting a part of myself that I've just discovered and want to know how it will be received." Mateus smiled, understanding perfectly what she meant. In his work as artistic director, he had experienced that same creative vulnerability, the sensation of exposing something deeply personal to public scrutiny. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Alexandra, the conductor who would lead the orchestra that night. "Clara, we have a situation," he said without preamble. Marcos is injured. He won't be able to play the cello solo today. Clara felt a wave of concern. The cello solo was a crucial part of the composition, a dialogue between the instrument and the piano that symbolized the conversation between past and present, between tradition and innovation. "Do we have a substitute?" she asked, trying to maintain her calm. "Yes, Gabriela Silveira. Extremely talented, just returned from a season in Europe. But she has never rehearsed the piece. We're sending her the score now." Clara knew Gabriela by reputation. An extraordinary cellist with a bold and emotional interpretative style. "Can we meet before the concert for a private rehearsal?" suggested Clara. "I've already arranged it. She'll be waiting for you at the theatre at 2. After hanging up, Clara explained the situation to Mateus. "This could be a blessing in disguise," he commented, always optimistic. "Sometimes a new interpreter brings something unexpected to the work, a perspective that not even the composer had imagined." Clara nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. Part of her evolution as a composer had been learning to release absolute control over her creations, allowing the interpreters to bring their own voices to the musical conversation. When she arrived at the Municipal Theatre, Clara found Gabriela already warming up her instrument. The young cellist, with curly hair and an intense expression, emanated a tranquil confidence that immediately reassured Clara. "It's an honor to meet you," said Gabriela, rising to greet her. "Your piece Echoes deeply moved me when I heard it in São Paulo. This new work seems even more personal." "It is," confirmed Clara, appreciating the musician's perceptiveness. "It speaks about finding our roots and at the same time creating new ones." The rehearsal was a revelation. Gabriela not only technically mastered the solo, but brought an emotional intensity that perfectly complemented Clara's intention. At certain moments, her interpretation suggested nuances that Clara hadn't consciously considered, but that deeply resonated with the spirit of the composition. "You bring something special to this piece," said Clara when they finished. "As if you were telling your own story through it." Gabriela smiled, a smile that illuminated her entire face. "Perhaps it's because I also recently met my biological mother," she revealed. "So this idea of roots, of rediscovered connections, speaks directly to my heart." The synchronicity of Gabriela's personal experience with the theme of the composition seemed to Clara another of those significant encounters that had punctuated her life lately, as if the universe conspired to align the right people at the right time. Upon returning to the dressing room assigned to her, Clara found a bouquet of flowers with a card from Helena. "Fly high, sister. Mum is watching, I'm sure." These simple words brought tears to Clara's eyes. Her relationship with Helena had transformed in these months, evolving into an adult friendship based on mutual respect and the recognition of their individualities. The concert hour approached. Clara changed, opting for a deep blue dress that she had bought especially for the occasion. She pinned the brooch that João had given her on the lapel, a talisman connecting her to a family history that she now embraced instead of feared. When she went out to the theatre lobby for the preliminary greetings, she saw that João had arrived, animatedly conversing with Mateus. "Nervous?" asked João upon seeing her approach. "Curiously, no," she replied, echoing what she had said to Mateus that morning. "I feel that this piece needed to be written and now needs to be heard. What happens afterward is beyond my control." João nodded, understanding. "My father used to say something similar about his political speeches," he commented, "that once pronounced, the words took on a life of their own, for better or worse." While they were talking, Clara noticed a discreet commotion at the theatre entrance. A middle-aged man with a distinguished air and penetrating gaze had just arrived, accompanied by a group of people who clearly treated him with deference. "Who is that?" she asked Mateus, intrigued. "Roberto Mendes," he replied in a low voice, "director of the National Conservatory of Paris. He's in Brazil for a series of masterclasses and decided to include the concert in his agenda." Clara felt a wave of nervousness. Roberto Mendes was a legendary figure in the world of classical music, known both for his impeccable ear and for his extremely demanding standards. "Don't let his presence affect you," advised João, perceiving her sudden tension. "Remember why you wrote this music. It wasn't to impress critics or directors. It was to give voice to your own story." Clara nodded, grateful for the perspective. Conductor Alexandra approached, signaling that it was time to take their places. As the composer, Clara would have a special seat in the front row, from where she could observe both the musicians and the audience's reaction. The program began with two classic pieces magnificently interpreted by the orchestra. During the intermission, Clara remained in her seat, breathing deeply and centering herself for the second part, where her composition would be presented. When Alexandra returned to the podium, he made a brief introduction. Our next piece represents an important voice in contemporary Brazilian music. Roots, by Clara Santos, explores the musical traditions of our country through a modern and deeply personal language. We have the privilege of having the composer with us tonight, and the honor of presenting cellist Gabriela Silveira as guest soloist. An expectant silence took hold of the theatre. Alexandre raised his baton, and with a precise movement began the piece. The first measures established an atmosphere of quiet introspection, with harmonies that evoked the Brazilian forests at dawn. Gradually, elements of traditional rhythms began to emerge, transformed and recontextualized through the contemporary orchestral language. Clara had incorporated subtle references to lullabies her mother sang, intertwining them with motifs that suggested the classical music that had shaped her training. When the moment for the cello solo arrived, Gabriela rose to the occasion with an interpretation that transcended mere technical execution. Her instrument seemed to sing, lament, celebrate, telling a story of loss and rediscovery that visibly resonated with the audience. The dialogue between the cello and the other instruments created a sonic tapestry rich in emotional and cultural nuances. The piece culminated not with a traditional resolution, but with an opening that suggested continuity, future possibilities, paths yet to explore. The last notes hung in the air, gradually dissolving into the complete silence that followed. For a moment, no one moved or breathed. Then, like a wave that finally breaks on the shore, the applause began, first hesitant, then growing in intensity until it transformed into a standing ovation that shook the walls of the theatre. Alexandra indicated that Clara should come up to the stage. As she did so, she felt an almost overwhelming mixture of emotions: pride, gratitude, humility, and a sensation that something important had been completed and, simultaneously, only just begun. Standing next to Gabriela, who shone with the sweat and exaltation of her performance, Clara bowed before the audience. She saw Mateus applauding energetically, Helena and Larissa embraced and crying, João with an almost paternal look of pride. And, to her surprise, Roberto Mendes, the feared director of the Paris Conservatory, also on his feet, applauding with evident admiration. After the concert, while receiving congratulations in the lobby, Clara was approached by Mendes. "Extraordinary composition, Miss Santos," he said in formal but correct Portuguese. "You've achieved something that few contemporary composers achieve, creating a work that is simultaneously innovative and accessible, personal and universal." "Thank you," replied Clara, genuinely touched by the compliment. "It means a lot coming from you. I'm organizing a festival of contemporary women composers in Paris next year," he continued. "I would like to invite you not only to present this piece, but also for a 3-month residency at the conservatory, teaching master classes and developing a new composition." The proposal caught Clara completely by surprise. A residency at the prestigious National Conservatory of Paris was the kind of opportunity any composer would dream of, an international platform for her music and her pedagogical ideas. "It's an extremely generous offer," she replied cautiously. "I would have to consider my commitments at the Villa Lobos Conservatory." "Naturally," nodded Mendes. "Think about it. We can discuss the details later, but I believe it would be a valuable experience not just for you, but for our students in Paris, who would greatly benefit from your unique perspective." When Mendes moved away, Mateus approached, having witnessed the conversation from a distance. "An interesting proposal?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes attentive. Clara related the offer, still processing its implications. "Paris," murmured Mateus, "it's an extraordinary opportunity." "It would only be for 3 months," replied Clara, studying his reaction. "And I would have to coordinate with João to ensure that the conservatory functioned well during my absence." "I think you should accept," said Mateus firmly, surprising her. Your music deserves to be heard internationally. And I know an artistic director who happens to have some contacts in the Parisian music scene." Clara smiled, touched by his support. 15 years ago, an international opportunity had been what separated them. Now, it could be something they would experience together, each respecting the other's career and dreams. Later that night, in their apartment with a view of the Copacabana Sea, Clara sat on the balcony contemplating the city lights. Matthias brought 2 glasses of wine and joined her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noting her contemplative expression. "About how life comes full circle," she replied. "A year ago, I was stuck in a safe but unsatisfying routine, preparing myself for a competition that I thought was my last chance. Now I have an invitation to Paris, a career as a composer that I never imagined, a conservatory to direct. You—" "And what will you choose?" asked Matthias, his voice gentle but direct. Clara looked at him, seeing the man she had rediscovered and rediscovered, the partner who now supported her instead of competing with her. "I choose everything," she replied simply. "The conservatory, composition, Paris, you, my family. Not as compromises that divide me, but as parts of a complete life, like a composition where each element has its place and contributes to the whole." Matthias smiled, raising his glass in a silent toast. "To your personal symphony," he said. "May it continue to evolve and surprise." Clara toasted, feeling a deep certainty that she had finally found her true path. It wasn't a straight and predictable road, but a path that branched into multiple fascinating directions, all equally valid, all equally hers. "What do you think my mother would say?" she asked softly, a last vestige of doubt in her voice. Matthias considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she would say that you've done exactly what she hoped. You found a way to honor your roots while cultivating your own wings." Clara nodded, the words resonating deeply. That's what her composition roots had tried to express. That our origins give us strength, they don't imprison us, that we can honor our past while creating our future. And as the stars shone over Rio, Clara Santos, pianist, composer, director, lover, daughter, and sister, knew that she had made her great choice. She had chosen life in all its complexity, with all its contradictions and possibilities. She had chosen, finally, herself. 1 year later, Clara adjusted the treble clef brooch on her dress as she observed the movement of students in the courtyard of the Villa Lobos Conservatory. The institution had flourished remarkably under her direction, doubling the number of scholarship students and gaining national recognition for its innovative program that combined Brazilian musical traditions with classical and contemporary techniques. Her 3-month residency at the Paris Conservatory had been a resounding success. The new composition she developed there, Crossings, inspired both by her Brazilian roots and the experience of immersion in French culture, had been received with enthusiasm by European critics. The Paris Quartet had included the piece in their permanent repertoire, taking it to concert halls around the world. Matthias had joined her during part of her stay, taking advantage of the opportunity to establish collaborations with European music festivals. His career as an artistic director was also growing, with invitations to curate programs in several countries, always with special emphasis on Latin American composers. A soft touch on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Anna, her young protégée, now 13, and with a growing confidence both as a person and as a musician. "Director, I just finished my new piece," she announced, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "May I show it to you?" "Of course, Anna," smiled Clara, indicating the piano in the corner of the office. "And I've told you to call me Clara when we're alone." Anna nodded, still a bit shy despite the growing familiarity between them. She sat at the piano and began to play a surprisingly mature composition for someone so young. Clara listened attentively, noting how the girl had incorporated elements from the composition classes she had recently begun at the conservatory. "It's wonderful, Anna," she said sincerely when the student finished. "You've found your own voice, something that many musicians take decades to achieve." The girl's face lit up with the compliment. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she declared with the direct simplicity of youth. "Not just playing others' music, but creating my own." Clara felt a deep emotion at these words. Being able to inspire a new generation, especially young people from modest backgrounds like Anna, was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of her work as a director. "You'll be better than me," she replied gently, "because you will have started earlier to explore your own creativity." After Anna left, Clara returned to contemplating the courtyard, where now a group of students had formed an improvised circle, some with guitars, others with small percussion instruments, spontaneously creating a fusion of rhythms that merged samba, jazz and classical elements. It was exactly the type of cultural hybridization she had promoted since taking the direction, believing that the strength of Brazilian music resided precisely in its capacity to absorb and transform diverse influences. Her phone rang. It was Helena. "Just calling to confirm I'll be there at 7 for the concert," said her sister without preamble. "And guess what? I managed to sell 3 more paintings yesterday." "That's wonderful, Helena," exclaimed Clara, genuinely happy for her sister's growing success as a visual artist. Helena had discovered a talent for painting almost at the same time that Clara rediscovered her vocation for composition, as if both were finally blossoming simultaneously after years of rigidly defined roles. "The vernissage is next month," continued Helena. "You and Mateus are coming to São Paulo, right?" "We wouldn't miss it for anything," assured Clara. "It's already on our calendar." After hanging up, Clara opened her laptop to review the program for that night's concert. It was a special event, celebrating the first anniversary of the Isabel Santos Fund, which had granted full scholarships to 20 young talents from disadvantaged communities throughout Brazil. João had been extraordinarily generous, doubling his initial contribution and mobilizing other business people to support the initiative. Thinking of João, Clara smiled as she remembered their last meeting. He had fallen in love with a music historian he met during a conservatory event, a brilliant and determined woman who seemed to perfectly complement his complex personality. Clara noticed a serenity in him that didn't exist when they first met, as if he had finally found peace with his own past. The day passed quickly between classes, meetings, and the final preparations for the concert. When Mateus arrived to pick her up, Clara was ready, elegantly but not ostentatiously dressed. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her softly. "Ready for the big night?" "I am," she replied, pinning the treble-clef brooch to her dress. "It's a special night." The theatre was full when they arrived. Families of scholarship students, many of whom had never entered a concert hall before, mingled with habitual arts patrons and professional musicians, creating a vibrant and democratic atmosphere that delighted Clara. João and his companion Beatrice were waiting in the lobby. Beside them was Gabriela, the cellist who had become a close friend of Clara's since her memorable interpretation of Roots. "Mendes called this morning," informed Gabriela after the initial greetings. "The European tour is confirmed for next autumn. 6 cities, including London and Berlin." Clara nodded, still assimilating the reality that her compositions were being programmed by important international orchestras. It was a recognition she had never imagined when teaching piano in São Paulo, secretly dreaming of the Vienna competition as her last chance for musical relevance. The concert began punctually. It was a celebration of the talent of the young scholarship students, each representing a story of overcoming and dedication. Clara watched with pride as these students, many of whom had never had access to quality instruments before the program, demonstrated not only technical skill, but true musical expressiveness. The last presentation of the night was reserved for an ensemble formed by Anna at the piano, 2 violinists, a cellist and a flutist, all scholarship students of the program. They would interpret Heritage, a piece that Clara had composed especially for the occasion, incorporating elements from the various musical traditions represented by the young musicians. When the first chords sounded, Clara closed her eyes, letting herself be carried away by emotion. The piece spoke of continuity, of how music passes from generation to generation, transforming but maintaining its vital essence. There were subtle references to the melody that Antonio Monteiro had composed for Isabel, now recontextualized and reinterpreted by a new generation that was unaware of its original history, but could feel its universal emotion. Upon opening her eyes, Clara saw that Mateus was watching her with an expression of love and pride so evident that she felt her heart overflowing. He had been her first love, and now, after a long detour, her mature companion, someone who understood both her strengths and vulnerabilities and loved them equally. When the music ended and applause echoed through the hall, Clara was called to the stage along with the young performers. Joan joined them, representing the financial support that had made everything possible. "This is just the beginning," declared Joan to the audience. "The beginning of a tradition that honors the past while building the future." The Villa Lobos Conservatory, under Clara Santos's inspiring direction, is redefining what musical education means in Brazil, making it not a privilege for the few, but a right for many. Clara, normally reserved in public situations, felt compelled to speak. "Music has always been in us," she said, her voice clear and firm, "in our roots, in our stories, in our ancestral memories. What we do here is not creating something new, but awakening something that has always existed, the human capacity to express ourselves through sounds, to transcend the everyday and touch the eternal." Looking at the faces of the young musicians, at Helena and Larissa in the audience, at Mateus, João, and all who had become part of her transformative journey, Clara felt a deep gratitude for the winding path that had brought her here. Each choice, each apparent detour, had been in fact a necessary chord in the composition of her life. Later, at home, Clara sat at the piano, as she did every night before sleeping. It was her personal ritual, her moment of communion with the instrument that had been her most constant companion throughout life. Mateus joined her on the bench, not to play, but simply to be present. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her distant look. "About destiny," replied Clara softly. "About how all the paths we travel, even those that seem like detours or interruptions, eventually lead us where we need to be." Mateus nodded, understanding perfectly. He had lived his own journey of discovery and return, of loss and rediscovery. "Like that missed flight," he commented, referring to the fateful day at the airport when Clara had missed her flight to Vienna and met João. "Exactly," smiled Clara. "The flight I missed led me exactly where I needed to be." Her fingers found the keys almost of their own accord, playing the first chords of the melody that Antonio had composed for Isabel, that she had developed in echoes, and that now reappeared transformed in her new compositions, a musical theme that had become the leitmotif of her personal story. "You know what I like most about us?" asked Mateus, observing her fingers dance over the keys. "What?" asked Clara, curious. "That we're not a simple melody," he replied. "We're a complete composition with themes that develop, moments of tension and resolution, silences as important as the sounds." Clara smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. They weren't a perfect couple in the conventional sense, but they were perfectly complementary, like distinct voices in a well-balanced duet. "Life isn't about finding the perfect note," philosophized Clara, allowing music to flow through her. "It's about creating harmonies with the notes we are given." As the melody floated through the apartment and mingled with the distant sounds of the sea, Clara Santos, the girl who once dreamed only of perfectly playing others' compositions, now created her own music, built her own legacy and lived her own story, not as it had been planned, but as it had organically developed, note by note, surprise by surprise, choice by choice. And in these chords that resonated in the Rio night, Clara finally understood that destiny wasn't a rigid score to be followed, but a constant improvisation on themes we are given by life, by encounters, by losses and discoveries. True mastery wasn't in the perfect execution of a predetermined plan, but in the capacity to incorporate each unexpected chord into an increasingly rich and meaningful composition. Destiny, after all, wasn't what happened to us, but what we created from what happened, just as music isn't only in the written notes, but in the living, pulsating interpretation that gives them meaning. With this thought, Clara finished her nightly improvisation with a chord that was neither major nor minor, but a unique combination that simultaneously suggested conclusion and openness. Exactly like her life now, a completed chapter that opened the way to infinite future possibilities.